It is with great pleasure and enthusiasm that I extend my warmest greetings to each and every one of you from various corners of our nation and beyond. As nurses, we understand the profound impact our roles and responsibilities have on the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. And our commitment to continuous learning and professional development underscores our dedication to providing the highest standard of care to those in need. Today's theme is the importance of well-being, with presenters speaking on topics relevant to the promotion of well-being and the identification of tools and techniques to enhance well-being. By the end of today's program, it is our hope that everyone in attendance will take away practical knowledge and wisdom to help guide their own self-care and wellness regime, supporting their personal well-being and professional practice. We also hope that today's program provides you all with the opportunity to connect and learn from colleagues nationwide and internationally. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers, organizers, and sponsors for their invaluable contributions in making this Education Day possible. Your expertise, dedication, and unwavering commitment to advancing mental health nursing care and promoting clinician well-being is truly commendable. And in closing, I encourage each one of you to actively engage in today's presentations, to share your insights and experience, and to forge new connections with fellow colleagues. Together, let us seize this opportunity to empower ourselves with knowledge, to inspire excellence in our professional practice, and to reaffirm our collective commitment to promoting mental health and well-being for all. Thank you, and let us embark on this educational journey with enthusiasm and determination. As a part of today's program, we have a video welcome from Honorable Yara Sachs, the Federal Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. Minister Sachs is a long-time community advocate and leader focused on promoting health and addressing inequities in society. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video on behalf of the minister. So just give me 1 second and we'll get that played for you.
I'm Yara Sachs, Canada's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. Welcome to the Virtual Education Forum celebrating Mental Health Nurses Day. Nurses are at the heart of our healthcare system, and today we come together to celebrate your dedication and professionalism. In the face of many challenges, it's important to acknowledge not only the remarkable care you provide, but also the toll it takes on your own mental health and well-being. We understand that you are facing high patient workloads, stressful work environments, and scarce resources. We also recognize the impact COVID-19 continues to have on nurses. It brought stress to a new level that has led to a higher rate of burnout. Many nurses are leaving their jobs altogether, but you've persevered. The federal government, along with our provincial and territorial partners, are committed to supporting you. We recognize that the need for mental health supports has never been greater. Today, on Mental Health Nurses Day, we are focused on the need for the supports and services you need to ensure that you thrive in both your professional and your personal lives. To help support and retain members of this critical workforce, Canada's Chief Nursing Officer is working with the nursing community to develop a nursing retention toolkit. It offers practical strategies that employers and health authorities can use to improve the working lives of nurses and support nursing retention across Canada. Together, we can foster an environment where the importance of your mental health is not just recognized, but actively nurtured, ensuring that you can continue to help others. Wishing you a day filled with the enriching learning experiences, and may today invigorate your enthusiasm for the critical work that you do. Thank you.
We were delighted that we were able to get some words, these great words from Minister Sachs, so that is fantastic. Before we begin today's program, I would like to inform everyone about a door prize draw that will take place at the end of today's program. And for the prize, we'll be giving away a complimentary registration to the CFMHN National Conference in Ottawa, which will be in November this year. So please stick around to see who will win. And a reminder that we'll also be sending out an evaluation survey in the next couple days, along with your certificate of attendance to get your feedback on the Education Day. So please keep an eye out on your inbox there and complete the survey when you receive it. Before our keynote, additionally, we have a few basic ground rules for all of today's presentations. Please, as participants, to keep yourselves on mute at the start of the session to minimize any disruption, and just please hold your questions till the end of it. We will definitely have time for questions at the end of each session that will be facilitated by our panelists here. And then if you have a question, you can also just use the raise hand tool. So in that, it is under the reactions in tab or a little button in your Zoom toolbar, or you might see it directly on your participant toolbar there. You can raise your hand and we'll make sure to keep that orderly and get to each of your questions. You can also feel free to use the chat tool to enter your questions if you're more comfortable doing it that way. That's no problem. And we'll get to it as best as we can there. So to start today, really have the pleasure of introducing Dionne Sinclair. Dionne is an accomplished certified healthcare executive who is currently the Vice President of Clinical Operations and Chief Nursing Executive at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, or CAMH. A visionary leader with a passion for transformative change and innovation, Dionne has honed her skills in creating a climate that fosters innovation and develops novel approaches to achieve strategic outcomes. Throughout her illustrious career, Dionne has been celebrated for her unwavering high energy, strong work ethic, and enthusiasm and excellence in all of her endeavors. Known for her ability to motivate and inspire others, Dionne is also sought after motivational speaker, sharing her valuable insights and experiences to empower individuals within and beyond the healthcare community. So without further ado, I'm happy to pass over the mic and the screen to Dionne. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Troy, and welcome everybody. Happy Mental Health Nurses Day. And I know it's from Alberta. I've got Whitby. I'm looking at Hamilton, Montreal, St. John's, Newfoundland. So it's great that this is a national program. And I just love seeing everyone on the screen. I know for the ones in witness protection, you may not be able to come on screen, but for the ones who are, I'm going to celebrate you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and I have to give fair warning. There will be audience participation, so you're going to be asked to write something in the chat, or you're going to be asked to give an emoji when needed. So today I will be speaking on promoting health and promoting mental health nurses' well-being, and my bio's already been read, but I bet you didn't know some of these things about me. So I'm an immigrant child from Jamaica. And I usually start off by saying, do not let my youthful good looks fool you. I graduated nursing back in 1986. So anybody else graduated in 1986? This is where you can give a thumbs up emoji. Anyone? Am I the only one? That's me down here in this picture. I also was in Army cadets, and my biggest supporter right here is my mom. I'm also a mom of 3 beautiful daughters right here. Althea, who's 35, also a registered nurse. My middle daughter, Pam, she is a social worker. She works in Ottawa. She's making me a grandma come next month, yeah. And my youngest, Brianne. All this I'm sharing just to say, if there are moms on here, give me an emoji. If there are daughters on here, give me an emoji. If you are a child belonging to someone, thank you. We have so much in common. I am one of those lifelong learners who was always going back to school. So this picture right here, I started out as an RNA at the time in 86. This is my diploma RN picture. This is me graduating from York University with my master's. I'm just sharing this picture. This is, I call it the Dionne slide, the immigrant picture with the, only 2 Black kids in the class. My brother Steve was the only other person in my class until high school that looked like me. So the agenda, I will be pointing out some key points for mental health nurses to strive and thrive, the ingredients for curing, and about creating a valued and sustainable environment, advocating for your own well-being and self-care, and some resources for mental health nurses and how to access some of those resources. So some key points. When it comes to self-care and well-being, I've got some points here in my notes, but I want to see in the chat, what are some of those things that you do or you do believe people should be doing for their health and well-being? I did say audience participation. I need to see the chat blow up, or that means I just see names and nobody's here. Okay, I'm going to read it out. Going to the gym, sleep, physical activity, you take a walk, you eat, you sleep, you exercise, spend time with family and friends. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Pets, fresh air, hobbies. That's great. Mental health nurses, you need to prioritize your own health and well-being. It is not being selfish. It actually being very supportive of yourself. It's like that oxygen mask on the plane. Put your own mask on first. It includes regular self-assessment. Check in with yourself. How are you doing? It might sound strange, but literally take a look in the mirror and talk to yourself. How are you doing today? And if not, we're going to go through some resources that you might need. No free overtime for work. Okay, I love it. Everyone read the chat. There's some great things in there. So regular self-assessment, seek support when needed, and maintain a healthy work-life balance. For continuous education and training, stay up to date on the latest evidence and practices when it comes to treatment. So there's meditation. I know in your profession, you know about medication, you know about the professionals, but there's other therapeutic interventions that are crucial for mental health nurses to provide high quality care. Continuously learn, educate yourself, look for the best evidence, look for the best practices. And when it comes to collaboration, teamwork, fostering a culture of collaboration in your workplace and open communication with the multidisciplinary team is essential. Did I see that in the chat? Did anyone say collaborate with the multidisciplinary team? Remember, you can't do it alone. And I know sometimes nurses believe we can because we're like super people, but it's great. Teamwork makes the dream work. So mental health nurses should actively engage with the psychiatrists, social workers, occupational therapists, and other healthcare professionals to ensure there's comprehensive patient care. And it is so okay to go to someone and say, you know what, Rosie, I'm struggling here. I'm not sure what's going on. Have you ever seen this before? Or you talk to Victoria and say, Victoria, come, can we have a talk? I'm just not having a good day. And Victoria could be social work, OT. It's great that you really build strong relationships with the other team members and rely on them. And when it comes to coping strategies, given the challenges with our work currently, you should develop effective coping strategies, which include stress management, debriefing sessions when things go wrong. If anyone came into Zoom call, oh, all right. Access mental health services. So again, it's time for the chat. Let me know what kind of coping strategies. I know there's activities for self-care, but do you have any coping strategies you want to share with your colleagues? There's 50 of us on here. I should see at least 20 coping strategies. Anyone does meditation, yoga, cuddling, mindfulness? Yes, outside. Do you notice that? Self-care strategies and coping strategies, they go together. They're the same. And then advocacy and empowerment. Mental health nurses, you play a vital role in advocating for your patients' rights and promoting mental health awareness, empowering patients through education, support, and involvement in their contribution for positive outcome. There's nothing more satisfying. When I actually meet some of our patients outside, I just smile. I keep going. I don't out anyone. But when you see someone that came in sick and you are discharging them and they're so much better, when you're advocating for that patient, it actually, well, warms my heart. I don't know about you, but it's great when you don't just see when someone comes in crisis. It's great to see them. I love our outpatient nurses as well. They get to see them when they're doing much, much better. All right, so our ingredients for creating valued and sustainable environment, supportive leadership. Okay, don't put anything in the chat, but you may want to give me an emoji if you have a supportive leader, if you want to. All right. Okay, in the chat then, what would you like from a supportive leader? Because strong leadership that values the contributions of mental health nurses, providing mentorship, advocacy, resources, those are essential. So at CAMH, and I believe there are some CAMH nurses on here, for me, you need to feel valued and appreciated. You need to have that sense of belonging. You also need to know that you have an equal opportunity to become the CNE. Seriously, I'm going to be a CEO one day, and I do need someone to replace me. So you need to have that opportunity for advancement, for developmental assignment. And you also want to know that your voice is heard. So your leadership should be able to understand the scope of nursing and values. You have to be patient, feeling trusted. See, thank you, Kristen. It's so important that leadership matters. So I'm going to talk to the leaders on here. And I know if you're a nurse, you're a leader. The role you have is to grow future leaders. Your manager, director, VP, or just experienced nurse, you're growing those future nurses that are coming your way, the clinical externs, the new grads. And it's super important that you are supportive as a leader. I always usually say there are plenty of nurse leaders out there, but if you can't find one, you need to be one. Anybody want to give me an emoji for that or an amen? No? Okay. All right. Workplace safety and resources, ensuring a safe work environment, adequate staffing levels, access to necessary resources, appropriate training, handling challenges, situations, and fundamentals for fundamentals for well-being. So if you are not feeling like you have the proper resources, really talk to your manager, supervisor. If you're the manager or supervisor and you have some control, ensure your team has the resources they need. Also, appropriate training. At CAMH, we have the TIDES program, which is a trauma-informed de-escalation program that everyone must go through. It's mandatory. So that is how to handle challenging situations. I believe other places might have nonviolent crisis intervention. Whatever it is, ensure that you actually take the program. We actually found out that many people, they were, they needed to renew their TIDES, and everyone is up to date now. But to have some credibility, especially when you're a leader, you cannot go out and tell everyone, well, you need to take X, Y, and Z if you haven't taken X, Y, and Z. When it comes to wellness program, implementing a wellness program that focuses on physical health, I saw that in the chat, mental well-being and emotional support can significantly contribute to creating a sustainable environment. So at CAMH, we have a thing called lavender support. Someone give me an emoji if they have lavender support where they work or something. This is particularly for staff after a critical event, after some stressful event, that we have other staff that come to support them. Has anyone heard of lavender support? I don't know that we do the best job in taking care of staff. Oh, it's a shame, Kristen. Staff are the most important people in the organization, seriously, because when the staff are fine, oh, there's a rapid response team. When the staff do well, patients and families do exceptionally well. So my philosophy is the staff are the foundation of the organization. They're holding the organization up. And if you don't have a strong, solid foundation, most things crumble. So you have to take care of that foundation, make sure it's solid. Oh, they have a lavender team in Kentville. Thank you, Kentville. All right, getting feedback mechanisms. If you are that supportive leader, you have to establish regular feedback with your nurses. So I hope everybody here has had a recent performance review. Can anyone give me a thumbs up, an emoji? You've had a recent performance review in the last year, in the last 6 months? Okay, I don't, oh, I got one. Awesome. That's not good. Somebody had one next week. Okay, that's good. If it's coming, that's great. It really is important because it's a two-way street. When there's a performance review, you get to voice some of your concerns at the review. Yes, I know you can do that, especially when you do have a supportive leader. You provide input on process improvement, practices, and decision-making that foster a sense of ownership. And what I do with performance reviews myself, it's like, well, I would like some executive coaching. I'd also like to do XYZ course. One of them a few years back, I want to do my CHE. I want to become a certified healthcare executive. I put that down on my performance review. I'm not saying it might work for you. However, now your supervisor needs to help you make that happen because it's a goal you want to attain. It's amazing what you can do when you get very creative with those performance reviews. Okay. But it really is important to have feedback. There's nothing worse than working very hard, knowing that you are doing a good job, but not hearing from your manager or supervisor. So again, managers, supervisors out there, make sure you talk with your team. Reward and recognition, same thing. Dedication and hard work of mental health nurses. You do need incentives. You do need public acknowledgement, and that reinforce your value within the healthcare system. So how many people on here actually nominate any of their friends or colleagues for nursing awards? Anyone? Anyone? There's quite a few awards out there. There's quite a few. I know in Ontario, the RNAO, I think it just closed. They had several nursing awards. That is something that you can do just to reward and recognize a colleague. And it would be amazing if one year only mental health nurses received all the nursing awards, Nightingale Awards, whatever the awards are. Am I being not realistic? Oh, somebody wrote a reference for a nursing student. Thank you, Matthew. Awesome. So think about it. There are many awards out there. I know there's a National Nursing Leadership Award. We should think about each other and think about nominating amazing nurses who are doing awesome things. We just keep it really quiet. We should not do that anymore. All right. So addressing those points and ingredients, you can create a supportive and sustainable environment. And thank you all for the participation. I really appreciate it. Zoom is really hard to be interactive. So advocating for your own well-being. We've already talked about some of the self-care practices, but seeking support, you have to recognize it's really important to seek support. So I'm going to get personal for a minute. I'm not saying this for anybody's pity, but in 2015, I lost my brother to gun violence. And I am tough. I am strong. I thought I could handle it. He was in that first picture, the immigrant school kids, me and my brother, the only two kids in public school. He was shot and killed. And I was strong for the whole family. And you know, when you're the nurse in the family, you have to hold everybody else up. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't advocating for myself. I had to stop and seek help because I couldn't even concentrate. I couldn't function as I used to. Imagine me quiet. For those who know me, Victoria, you know me. Imagine me quiet, not saying anything, not wanting to do anything, not wanting to go out, not even want to get out of bed. Somebody knows, absolutely, we're all human, but sometimes we keep it to ourselves and we don't tell anyone. So people think, well, it must be me because no one else feels this way. We all get there sometimes. So you need to seek help. I sought help. I got the help I needed. I still miss my brother terribly. However, I share my story just to say it is okay to reach out. It is okay to seek support, and it is okay to set boundaries. So I have a note right here. I have this thing, and my team knows it. I have a right to disconnect. If I am not on call, please, the building has to be burning down for you to disturb me because I have so much other priorities and things going on. You have a right to disconnect. And it's super important. Set clear boundaries at work, but also in your personal life, and to prevent burnout and promote your mental health and well-being. Sometimes it's not work, it's family. I know a few nurses who go to work to get away from family because they need to do everything under the sun for home and for the extended family. So please remember to set those boundaries and then educate yourself and others. I've mentioned this before, increase your awareness and recognize signs of distress. Sometimes it's hard to recognize it in ourselves, but if you have a strong relationship or friends that can say, hey, Josephine, you're just not seeing yourself anymore. Can we talk? I like your smile and I haven't been seeing it in a while. I'm not saying that's going on, but you can do that for a friend, and especially someone you trust. that's one of the best things you can do for them. Recognize signs of distress and advocate for evidence-based practices. People will tell you a lot of things, but we do know, at the bottom, you'll see all my references, but exercise, fresh air, just even taking a deep breath or smiling can change your mood. It won't fix everything, but I smile a lot because some people who don't wish me well, I smile because it's like, yeah, I'm a positive mindset for me, keeps me going. And then collaboration and networking, build relationship with your colleagues. I've mentioned that before. Join support groups, engage in collaborative efforts and to address mental health challenges. So if you're on a sports team, I want to hear about it. In the chat, this is your chance again. Do you play pickleball? Do you golf? Basketball? Dodgeball? Bowling? Hey, curl. I curl. Anybody on here curl? Basketball? All right. Anybody run? You do marathons. Somebody else golf, cycling. Awesome. What else? You're part of a running group. Somebody sleeps. Riley, I want to join that sleep group. Kayaking. Somebody else curls. Rosie, awesome. Allison also sleeps. Okay, well, Matthew's laughing. It is important to have support groups. So for Black and Brown nurses on here, I founded the Canadian Black Nurses Network. And really, it is just a group of us. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn to get together, support each other, motivate each other. It is great when you have that connectivity. And somebody used to paraglide. Victoria, you should still paraglide, maybe, or not. Okay. So fun fact, I am on the Jamaican Olympic curling team. I worked in Thunder Bay. I took it up. Just like the bobsled team, Jamaica now has a national curling team. We're going to the Winter Olympics in Italy to just, look good in our uniforms. But anyway, next. Some resources available for mental health nurses for self-care and well-being. Well, most organizations have wellness programs, and please take advantage of all the wellness programs. For all the people with organizations with wellness programs, give me a thumbs up, an emoji. You should have a wellness program in your organization. Anyone? I don't see any emojis. All right. So Access Wellness Program, focusing on physical health. We have a gym at work. Does anybody else have a gym where they work? And people, it's $10 a month, way better than any other outside gyms. So take advantage of those things. And it's really helps with even emotional support. I work out. For those who Googled my name, you'll see that I love weight training. Middleton, Nova Scotia, small but free. Yes, somebody has a gym in their basement. They work from home. Okay, awesome. Super important that you can take part in the wellness programs. Hotlines and crisis line. CAMH with a bunch of other community partners launched 988 just recently. And that's anyone that if they're in distress, they can call. And 988 is super important. It is a suicide prevention hotline, but it is a hotline. You can talk to someone 24/7. Spread the word, 988. And then advocacy, collaboration, and we've already said about self-care. Do you see a role for retired nurses to absolutely? Yes, I do see a role for retired nurses to support nurses. As a mother of a nurse, yes, they absolutely do need support. Please, I will share my contact information. So you're wondering, well, what does Dionne do for her health and well-being? I am a Zumba instructor. I also worked for Good Life for 15 years teaching body pump, body jam. This is a picture of one of my last Zumba classes before COVID. There was over 100 people in the class. It didn't matter if you're male, female, it didn't matter, any very diverse group, let's say that, but we had fun. And so much fun that I usually am asked to be the person who brings out the entertainers. at Ottawa's Caravibe. It's like the Toronto Caribbean Carnival. All that to say, find something you're passionate about. Find something you love, and that can be a part of your health and well-being. Oh, somebody loves Zumba. Awesome. Because you cannot just work. Does that make sense? I don't work to live. I live to, no, yeah. I work to live. I don't live to work. It is one part of who you are. It cannot be all who you are, because one day you will retire, or one day you may not be able to work. And so you have to find other things that you're passionate about. And, you know, even if it's just walking, walking is amazing. It's good for you. Next. All right. How to access those resources. You have the employee assistance programs, most professional development programs, and there, again, I have said about access hotlines and crisis support. So employee assistance program offer confidential and free services that provide access to mental health resources, such as counseling, therapy, and support groups. And it is okay, your whole family can access the EAP program. And it is confidential. It's usually an outside agency. It's no one inside your organization. It is there for you to access. Advocacy and collaboration. Advocate for better mental health resources by identifying gaps and speaking up. So if you're unionized on here, you know that you can speak to somebody in the union to say, hey, next time you guys are negotiating the collective agreement, yes, I'm a VP and I'm saying this, there's a gap. We need, I don't know, massage chairs at work. Do not go back to your organization and said, Dionne Sinclair says you need to give us a massage chair. Advocate, though, for something you need. That's all I'm saying. And education for yourselves and collaborations. I know some organizations are bringing in people that do wellness or do mindfulness or teach yoga. So you can advocate for those things if you don't have it where you work. And if you're in small town Canada and you don't have a yoga teacher, guess what? You could be the yoga teacher. You could be the Zumba instructor. It's a one-day training. And then you could be the one to help your colleagues with their mental health and wellness. Does that help? Okay. Awesome. All right, my last slides here. Be gentle with yourself. You're doing the best you can. I know it's very hard because we can be our toughest critics. How many people on here, give me an emoji, give me a thumbs up if you are your toughest critic? You wouldn't say to your friends some of the things you say to yourself or about yourself. Okay, you don't have to give me an emoji. I say it to myself. And this one is very important. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you absolutely need to take care of yourself and let your family know that. You're taking care of yourself so you can better take care of them. Does that make sense? All right. And please, 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 it's for your health and well-being. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know already. I'm not sharing anything that is like brand new, fundamentally different than something someone else would say. These are just basic things. You have to look out for yourself, look out for your friends, look out for your colleagues, look out for your peers. Take care. And you know what? Start a walking group at work. I was at South Lake and the nurses, where were they? I think it was OB. They had line dancing at lunch. They would do like the Cupid shuffle, or they would do like all these different line dances, and the music would play just for like 10 minutes. It was amazing. It's just stop everything you do and just relax and have fun. I always ran and made sure I joined in on the fun. All right, so these are actually active links, so I hope my presentation gets shared, but online resources and references where information comes from. There's lots of information out there. There's lots of evidence and best practices when it comes to your mental health and well-being, but it does start with you, and it starts with you deciding that you are worth it and you're going to give yourself grace and take the time you need to take care of yourself, to go to the gym or go for the walk or just eat healthy. there's one thing, I'm going to stop sharing now. That's my last slide. One of the things I didn't talk about, and I usually share with other groups, how am I doing for time? Somebody please stop me. I can talk forever. I'm good. All right. So the last thing, and it's stressful for nurses because I was one of them, is your financial health and well-being. Nothing is more stressful than living paycheck to paycheck. And I do know that happens with nurses. I'm a single mom, been through a divorce. It does happen. So find yourself an advisor, somebody who can help you. Even talk to someone at your bank, because I know many nurses, they're working 2-3 jobs. They're working overtime. They're working double overtime. They're working Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter. Their children are raising themselves. And that's not healthy. That's not good, because the other thing that happens in this country, because you're working and you have a T4, guess what happens? All that overtime you work, the government comes back at tax time and say, oh, Miss Sinclair, you worked yourself into a brand new tax bracket. You owe us a lot more money and we're here to collect. Ask me how I know. So it's so important that find an advisor. Sometimes the benefits provider in your organization also offer advice. Talk to someone in HR, because the people that come talk to me, it is, Dionne, I don't know what I'm going to do. I am so stressed. I'm doing one credit card, paying another one. And I do give some advice. I've got some background in it. However, it's something that nurses really need to seek help in, because you work way too hard not to see some fruits of that labor. And I've done this before. I looked at my T4 and then I looked at what I have in the bank, and it's like, I've been robbed. Somebody must have went into my account and robbed me, because that's not right. So please, that is, financial stress is extremely damaging to a nurse and to a family, especially when you do so much overtime and 2-3 jobs. The kids need you at home. So seek an advisor, talk to someone, and they will help you get on the right track. That's it. That's all I have. Hi, Victoria.
Thank you, Dionne, for such an excellent keynote. My name is Don Leidl. I'm the Federation President. I'll be facilitating the Q&A as well as the ongoing the discussion for this keynote, as well as for all of the remainder of the sessions today. If you do have a question, we can do first come, first serve. Just please put up your hand and I'll call you out. If you're not wanting to speak within the group, happily put your question into the chat and I can read it out on your behalf. So some definite wisdom in Dionne's words, as always. I would open it up to the floor then for any comments or any discussion on the keynote. And I see Daniela has her hand up. So Daniela, you're first to go.
Hi, thanks, Don. Thanks, Dionne. This was a great keynote. It's nice to see you again. I really missed your energy. So, I mean, you're an inspirational leader, an amazing nurse, a mom, just like such a model. And what I wanted to ask is, what did you find is the biggest challenge? And I don't necessarily mean for you, like, but being part of the system that's complex, that doesn't always look out for a nurse's well-being, and yet being the one to advocate for it. What has been the biggest challenge, or it is, or anything that you can?
So because of my energy and the person I am, one of my biggest challenge is I can't do everything, even though I think I can. So I've been told, Dionne, you can't boil the ocean. And I finally figured, oh yeah, I know what they mean. And the other challenge is slowing myself down and taking my own advice, because it's like, what are you up to now? Stop, rest. So challenging myself. The system really is, I'll say what it is. For others, it's you can navigate it easier. As a Black nurse leader, I find I've had to struggle every step of the way to make it to where I am. That's why I ended up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, because some people who've heard my talk before, I was in Ottawa and the VP, she said, oh, it's not your performance. You're just not a good fit for my team. And that day she let me go. And I actually shared that at my next interview to say, it happens. And so I never get married to any job that I'm so loyal that if they let me go, I'd be like devastated. It's like, no, I give myself 3 to 4 years in places, and then I have a plan to move on. I've always had the Dionne plan, and it took me to Thunder Bay. Now it put me on the Jamaican Olympic curling team. I'm going to be a CEO one day. Everybody on here knows that. So if you're ever in a room, Victoria, and they're saying, hey, we need a new CEO for London Health Science Center, I wonder who we could call. Speak my name in the room where the opportunity is being discussed. That's what we can do for each other. For me, it's challenging because I like things done quickly, like now, right now. And I've had to learn to be patient. And my mother laughs at me all the time because I was the most impatient child. And she goes, see, you're learning. And it's like, yes, I'm learning to be patient and wait and include everybody in the decisions. All stakeholders need to be aware, lots of stuff. But it was all for my good and for my benefit because I did learn and I reflect on what I was doing. And because of that, I believe I am where I am now, because it's sad to learn all those lessons the hard way, but I did learn them. Some people never learn them. So I can say it very proudly now. You'll see me at meetings sitting and I am quiet and I do listen and I take notes. And people say, Dionne, we haven't heard from you. And it's like, oh no, I'm practicing my active listening skills. So you make it what it is, the system that you're working with, and look for positives. I'm always looking for the positive, and I do have goals. It's like I never fail. I learn. I either win or I learn. And I'm always learning. There's always opportunities to improve, and I never take myself seriously, ever, ever, because lots of opportunities still to improve.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
We have a couple of questions, Dionne, in the chat. The first one is from Wendy Bowie. Do you have any advice for wanting to take time off for self-care, but having the anxiety of work that waits for you when you get back? So how to ask for self-care time and deal with the anxiety for what you know you're going to come into when you return back into the work environment.
Okay, so just be very honest, saying I need this time, so when I get back, I'll be a better peer, a better coworker, a better nurse. The second thing, I leave a message on my email because I will be on vacation. You know, you're out of office. If you sent me an email during this time, it's supposed to go to, you know, Josephine, I'm picking on you, who's covering for me. If it is super important, please send me another email when I get back, because I get back to 400 emails. It may not be seen or read because you saw my out of office. And so I'm very deliberate with how I message my out of office. If it's that important, they're going to send me a reminder. Oh, Dionne, I just want to bring this to the top of your email. It's like, thank you very much for doing that, because it was at the bottom on the like 399th, and it would probably not get seen. I do depend on my team when I'm away. I trust them to, you know, make decisions, answer questions. So I shouldn't have much when I come back. And I educate the rest of the staff at CAMH. Please, if you have a question about this, talk to Sharita. She's the Director of Nursing Practice and Interim VP and CNE while I'm away. So she can handle it.
Excellent response. We have an online question again from Megan Pledge. It's about the lavender teams at CAMH. So it's a two-part question. The first, how long has this been in place? And was there immediate buy-in from the staff when lavender teams were implemented?
Okay, so it's lavender support. And I do believe there was buy-in. Only reason because I came from South Lake Regional Hospital where they developed a lavender. It's like code lavender, but we don't have a code call. And this is for staff that are in distress or staff who've come through something very traumatic. It's been around, I think, either a year and a half or 2 years now, but I can put you in contact with our Sean, who's responsible for the lavender support. And we actually have policy, procedure, documentation, and I think we've written a paper, a discussion paper on the effects of it. But this is a response for staff who just need the support. Usually after a critical incident, traumatic injury, they are available on the units, and they're not just for frontline, they're for managers. I've participated in a lavender support, and we can do it virtually for people just to talk about what they went through, how they're feeling. Oh, some people have a code purple. There you go. So yeah, lavender support. I can get more information. I can put my CAMH contact in here. I'm putting my CAMH email in the chat.
Thanks, Dionne. I have a question as well, and it was something that really caught my attention at the end of your talk. Just bringing the financial aspect as far as a source of stress for us. We often think about the work as being the big source of stress, but we also have lives, and like you said, working to live and living to work, and that kind of balance. Maybe I just open it up to you or to anybody. Ways of managing, especially nowadays with inflation and like now it's worse than ever. So how are people in your organization managing with the financial stress and the impact that has on their ability to actually do their job effectively?
I think it's education and financial literacy, because many people, they don't have that literacy. And I do know Sun Life, which is our benefits provider, HR did bring them in to sit down with staff and talk about where to save, where to invest, things like that. But staff came and said, well, it'd be great how to save if I had anything to save, but they're literally paycheck to paycheck. So you have to become financially literate. And that's something I personally had to do, because I was one of those staff working 2-3 jobs and overtime, a lot of overtime. You have to understand the tax system, how it's set up. You work so much overtime, you've put yourself in a new tax bracket. People need to know this ahead of time, because come tax time, if they're asking for $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 back, you actually went to a shift for $2.49 an hour. And if people understood that, I don't think they'd pick up that overtime shift. It isn't worth it. They'd go become a business owner, become something else that you actually get some tax breaks. So I had to go get that for myself. We talk about living below your means, setting a budget. Maybe you need to consolidate your debt. There's lots of things that you can do. And having an emergency fund. When I got let go, it wasn't a layoff. I was in a panic because I'm going, oh my God, what happens if I don't find another job? I'll have to go back to the bedside. That feeling alone is enough to, cause a lot of stress. So having a plan. What would I do if I lost my ability to earn income? So there's things out there like even critical illness. I'm full disclosure, I do some financial services, but critical illness is so important, because 1 in how many nurses now are afflicted by cancer? And your workplace may not have critical illness. They have short-term disability, long-term disability. But if you're used to your full salary or overtime and you're the breadwinner, I know a lot of single moms who are nurses, and your kids need you. So it's so important to get that financial education, because there's lots of tools out there to assist you if you know they exist. I was 50 years old when I found out. I was 50 years old when I got a will. My brother, when he passed, that's when I got one. I have time. He died without one. And it was a hard lesson to learn. So on here, find someone, find an advisor, talk to someone, call someone, and get those things in order, because your family don't need to suffer. And that can happen. Sorry to be such a downer, but it's super important. And no one has that conversation with us. When we're in high school, did anybody get financial literacy class? College? See, Troy, where'd you go to school? Because my school didn't do that. No. Okay. No, and it's really important. And nurses, we actually do get great salaries, but what do you have in your bank account, savings, or how much do you have left over? Because inflation is eating away at everything. Anybody seen the price of gas lately? Anybody on here can go to Costco and leave without spending $200. I want to know the secret. And I'm one person. Anyone? Does it happen? I hear it might happen. Yeah. So I hope that's help. Start financial planning. See, there you go.
So there's some positive examples in the chat of some colleagues that have started planning right at the beginning of their career, and that's good to see. And then some great comments. Nursing schools should have financial literacy integrated into their course. Nurses are professionals, and that could be very valuable for information within a nursing education curriculum. It looks like the majority, though, didn't have any financial planning and would greatly have benefited or appreciated it.
Yeah.
So a very
And I know someone put our RSPs in the chat, but do you know about the tax-free savings account? Because I had those RSPs, and when I hit some hard time, I went to take them out. They took half back in taxes, and I didn't know that. So government has other things out there you can access. I've put my email again in the chat. Please reach out. It's something I am passionate about. And then having 3 daughters, I don't want them to make the same mistakes I made, because it is like, although I look young and gorgeous, I'm going to be 57. I know, right? Josephine, you're smiling. And so I'm closer to retirement, but I can't go. I was supposed to go at Freedom 55, right, Victoria? Remember Freedom 55? I'm just trying to avoid going back to Walmart or Tim Hortons when I'm 70. So I'm working hard right now, living below my means, to make sure that doesn't happen. It is something important, and the less stress you have if you can stay home with your kids, it's really helpful.
excellent information, Dionne. Any questions from the group or into there's nothing into the chat, but there's some excellent comments going into the chat. So if you haven't had a chance, please scan the comments. Any additional questions for our keynote, Dionne Sinclair? So welcome back, everybody, then, for session 2. Titled Using a Holistic Lens to Enhance Balance and Well-Being. This session is going to be presented by Dr. Siobhan Bell. Dr. Siobhan Bell has been practicing registered nurse since 2006 with the College of Nurses of Ontario. Her practice experience from 2006 until today covers a variety of practice environments, including long-term care, retirement, community, home care, acute care, medical surgical, intensive care, critical care, and the emergency room. And currently actively practicing as a sexual assault and intimate partner violence forensic nurse examiner, a nurse psychotherapist, and a professor of nursing for Seneca Polytechnic's RPN to Honors BScN program. Dr. Bell is also the current president of the Nurse Psychotherapy Association of Ontario and the education coordinator for the Canadian Forensic Nurse Association. Along with her busy nursing career, Siobhan is a partner to her husband of 22 years and mother to 2 boys, and lives with her family in rural Ontario with a collection of pets. It looks like a dog and a bird, as well as some chickens. So welcome, Siobhan, to the Education Day, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Don. I always hate listening to my bio. Talk about holistic lens and balance. I can definitely say that my whole career has been unknowingly about trying to create balance and trying to find the holisticness within my nursing career. So when they asked me to talk about a holistic lens and what that means for the nurse, I did immediately actually start with myself, because I thought, well, how do you tell somebody else who's a nurse what that's like without really evaluating what it is for yourself? And I think for me, that's been a lifelong and will continue to be a lifelong journey that I have thankfully been taught by all of those wonderful nurses that have come before me and who continue to be mentors for me. Being the daughter of a nurse, being the wife to a frontline person, being the mother to children, being a friend, being a colleague, all of these things have shown me and taught me that nothing in our life, nothing that we do, whether it's in our personal life or in our professional life, is not needing a holistic lens. Everything needs to have a holistic lens. And that has never been more sort of prevalent in the front of my mind than it is now. So this is my two sons, the oldest who's 15 turning 16, and the little one who is 8. He'll be turning 9 in June. And my husband of 22 years, who puts up with the fact that I've had a bazillion jobs in a bazillion different areas and am constantly going back to school. So I could not do the things I do without them. So when I was thinking about like what this could mean for us as mental health nurses today on Mental Health Day, I really went back to two things. One is the Nurse Psychotherapy Association of Ontario. When we were developing our foundation, we wanted to have a holistic lens on mental health nursing. And so we have defined holistic health for us and holistic nursing as that interconnectedness of biophysical, emotional, and environment. But the other nursing group that has done a great job of proactively approaching holistic health is the Canadian Holistic Nurses Association. And they define holistic health as the interconnectedness of body, mind, emotion, spirit, and environment. Ultimately, all of these things just talk about our ability to be and feel our best, right? That is ultimately the goal of being human, right? So what would happen if we paused and we thought about, if we were our own best friend, what would a holistic lens on our life look like? Well, it would likely look like this: balance, compassion, and empathy. Because when we're talking to our best friend, we are thinking holistically about them. We think about the things that are important to them, the things that they've defined as being essential to their life. We're always compassionate to them when life is hard and things are really difficult for them. And we have empathy when they're not their best self. But often we don't do that same thing for ourselves. We can't really have balance in our life if we are not doing this. One of the reasons I put this in here is because I am the worst at this. It is absolutely one of the things that I have never been good at. I've always been someone who is a great friend, but not as good at balancing for myself that same quality that I would give to a friend. And so over the last 10 years, especially through the pandemic and through some personal challenges that I've had, which included having to rediscover nursing, I've learned that I have to learn to be my best friend in order to have a holistic view of my own life, in order to give my family and my loved ones my best self. I can't be my best self if I don't have balance in my life. And for me, that's about being realistic about my commitments. It's very easy for me to be too busy to do anything. It's very easy when you're balancing, again, listening to my bio, right? I sit on 2 executive boards for associations. I have a private practice. I work as a forensic nurse. I teach. When you think about those 5 things, and then you add to that children, fur children, a husband, being realistic about commitment is really what balance for me is about. That might look different for other people, but ultimately what you're looking for is, do you have enough of those things in your life that realistically bring you joy? And as our keynote speaker said, bring you the financial balance also that you need, right? So it's about combining all of those things and being realistic about what we're committing ourselves to. I am at what I would call my peak commitment. I am about as maxed as I can get, and have been strategically, with support from colleagues, reevaluating some of my commitments, and will start to change as the spring and summer comes, because now it's my season of rebalance. So as if I was talking to my best friend, I would say, well, are you being realistic about your commitments? And I'm saying that same thing to myself now. Am I being realistic about my commitments? Compassion is hard. Being compassionate for yourself. I always thought that this was a no-brainer, right? Of course you're compassionate to yourself. You live in your own brain. How can you not be? It's actually a lot harder than it sounds. When we see hard things that are impacting our life, like if we think about the environments that we work in right now, there are not very many people who can say that they work in an environment that is not suffering the consequence of either fiscal challenges or staffing challenges or all of these things. Those hit our professional lives pretty hard. Then there's all of those things that are challenging to your personal life, like finances, right? Like our soaring grocery bills and rent or mortgages. The interest rates alone on mortgages has been such a huge hit for a lot of people. But are we actually being compassionate to ourselves about how these hard things are impacting our life? Most of us, if we were being honest, would probably think, no, what we're doing is toughing it out, because in a lot of ways, that's what nurses do, right? We pull up our socks and we get to work. You're going to get through it. We can see that the light is at the other end of the tunnel, but are we being compassionate to ourselves as we walk through that tunnel? So what does that look like? Well, for all of us, that might look different. For me, being compassionate is taking a break. If I was talking to my best friend, I'd say, well, when was the last time we had coffee? Or when was the last time we went for dinner? When was the last time we sat outside and just listened to the birds? Because I live in a beautiful part of rural Ontario. All of those things are being compassionate to myself, that pulling up my socks and working till I'm, blue in the face is not actually going to help me. But taking a break and taking a breather might be the most compassionate thing I can do, and is also going to create more resiliency. And that's a big thing that we want to look at when we're talking about our holistic self is, are we building our resiliency? And then empathy. I think in general, nurses are empathetic. We are a group of people who sees the worst things in life and finds a way to connect to the humanness of the person on the other side of it. We don't necessarily always give ourselves that same grace when we're struggling. I've seen colleagues who have struggled with substance abuse, and they are so the opposite of how they would be should they be dealing with a patient who has substance abuse issues. But they can't have that same empathy for themselves and understand that they're doing the best they can with what they knew. And now we're going to try to help them do better. We don't give ourselves grace when, we come home and we haven't eaten after a 12-hour shift, and then we scarf down an entire lunch, dinner, and dessert, and maybe tomorrow's breakfast all at the same time. And they were like, oh my goodness, that was such gluttony. Okay, yes, but would we say that to our best friend if they hadn't eaten for 12 hours and all of a sudden all of their favorite food is in front of them? So having empathy for how people process the tough things in life is also a really important piece of being kind to ourselves. When we have a holistic view of our world, we are creating balance and well-being. I often will tell my patients in my psychotherapy practice that for me, I always picture sort of those scales of justice in my head when I'm thinking about being pre-wired into that negative space and how I need to feed the positive side of that scale in order to balance things out. When we look at our life through that holistic view, and this includes our work life, that worldview, that paradigm is balance. When we have a good view with balance, we create well-being, which is exceptionally important, I think. So if we take it to that macro lens and look at the paradigm of what a holistic view would look of our world, and we think of the body, mind, emotion, and spirit, and of course our environment, there's a few things that we can think of. For body, as much as this sounds simple, eat, sleep, love, and laugh. All of these things physically are essential to our body's ability to be connected and feel well. Mind, our mind needs to do things like reading and reflecting and challenging it and resting it. I can't stress the rest part enough, at least for me. Emotion, feel it. One of the things that nurses are really good at is not feeling, right? We get so used to and good at holding our feelings in because we are having to be present for other people that sometimes we forget to actually feel. Processing our feelings is important. Seeking out feeling is important, right? When we are in a place of sadness or we're in a place of burnout, we need to seek feeling that is positive and share feelings. We need to share our feelings. As humans, it's important to connect and share how we're feeling. Spirit, seek purpose, seek connection, feel your purpose. For everybody, this looks differently. You know, for some of my colleagues and some of my patients, this is going to church. For some of my colleagues and patients, this is standing outside and listening to the wind and remembering why it was good to be alive, feeling why it is that we do what we do, seeking that connection to ourselves and to our world and to, if this is part of your belief system, to a higher power. And then environment. This one you'll notice is bigger than all the other ones, and that's because it encompasses or encapsulates all of them. How we interact with our physical environment, how we take care of our physical environment, access to a physical environment that is safe and has connection for you. So for example, just walking along a concrete jungle is not necessarily going to do the same for you as finding a tree on the side of the concrete jungle to stand and look at. Advocating for our environments. Nurses are great advocators. We will go out of our way to make sure that the patient down the hall who wanted green Jello instead of red Jello gets the green Jello. We can use those same tools to reach out and be better and louder advocates for better health environments that put patients and nurses and other healthcare practitioners at the center of decision-making. We can advocate for environments that educate us in the ways that we need for the healthcare system of today. I know as a faculty member, I do that all the time. I maybe do that more than some would like, but I am always advocating for what is our healthcare world now and how quickly can we get it into the minds of those who are going to be going out there to work in it. Advocating for an environment that supports us means saying these are the areas that we need support in and doing our best to ensure that we advocate for those. One of the things that I've been working on for the past year has been advocating for an environment where nurses working in mental health who give mental health care, like nurse psychotherapists, have a place in our world, have the ability to do that job. I can't express enough how amazing it was to walk into an office where a nurse sat across from me and listened to the challenges that I had in my workplace, in my home life, and I didn't have to explain to them. what I was talking about. Having the ability to connect with another nurse about nursing was mind-blowing for me. And it was my first experience with psychotherapy where I actually felt like walking out of that office felt different than walking into it. So I can't speak highly enough for the ability for nurses to connect with other nurses. And I think that we need to advocate for how important that is, especially in the current healthcare environment. Only another nurse really understands the responsibilities of nursing, the ethical and moral obligation of nursing, and how heavy that weighs on our human self. And that brings me to the part of being human. It's really easy to be, and I think our keynote speaker said it really well, that, you know, we do really good at just plowing through stuff and being the best for everyone else. What we do really badly on is being human and accepting that there are times where we're going to need to collapse. There are times when we're going to need to cry. And there are times where we need to step away and say, I'm not a good person for this right now, and I need to take a step back and take a break. All of these things are really important, but ultimately, being human means giving into all of those parts of that holistic lens. When we are being in balance with our feelings, when we are being in balance with our minds, when we're being in balance with all of those things that make us who we are truly being human. And no person, no patient will ever complain about connecting with your humanness. Doesn't make it easy, though. Being human certainly doesn't make being a nurse easy. It sometimes makes it much harder because it means that we have to admit and take care of those areas where we are failing. And we all have them, right? Mine is, I'll be back in 5 minutes, and 15 minutes goes away and I've scarcely realized that the time has passed. That's my humanness. Taking responsibility for it and saying to my patient, I'm sorry I said 5 minutes. I lost track of time. I'm back now. What can I do to help support you? Is taking responsibility and being the professional that I am. But I was also human in that moment. And that is really important, to give myself grace to be human in that moment. I know we talk a lot about reflective practice. It's built into every province's regulatory nursing body as an essential part of being a nurse. I've moved away from talking about it as reflection a little bit this year with students in particular, because I'm not sure that they truly have understood how important it is. And I've started saying, let's just do a self-check. Have you checked in with yourself? Are you feeling? Are you, all of those things that we need to know, whether it's in professional or personal. I'm walking into my environment that I work in as a nurse. Do a self-check-in. Have I eaten? Have I slept? Have I moved my body? Am I walking in there with a mind that's ready for work? Or do I need to stop and take a minute and take a deep breath and center myself to be able to take on all of those responsibilities and tasks for everybody else's holistic needs, right? So doing that self-check is really vitally important. Building the critical reflective piece into it, I think, is also essential, but it starts with that self-check. Once we've done that self-check and we start to critically analyze and think about all of those things that are part and parcel of what makes us who we are, we can then hopefully discuss, advise, seek support. One of the things is, again, I can't, strongly enough say that connecting with another nurse is so vitally important to our well-being. Being a good friend and colleague is never going to take you in the wrong direction. Being a good friend and colleague means talking to someone who knows what you're talking about, which is really important when you're trying to process through things that are difficult. But it also means celebrating the things that might be small wins in other people's opinion, but for the colleague that you work with, they understand how big some of those small wins are. You know, making it through a 12-hour shift and not losing your pen. For some people, that's a big win. At least for me, it was when I was working in ICU. Making it through a 12-hour shift and not losing a pen was a huge deal. Making it through a 12-hour shift and not feeling like my whole world was going to burn down because there wasn't enough resources is what some of our colleagues are dealing with right now. Imagine what walking out of that 12-hour shift and feeling the weight of that might feel like if you can share it across 2 sets of shoulders instead of 1. One of the things I'm advocating for in our leadership and hopefully within our nursing leadership is that we really start to think about, have we built reflective time and connective time into our nursing workforce? So if we're working 12-hour shifts, we're expecting nurses to stay after to give report, to receive report, but have we also built into that time connection? Should we not maybe be paying nurses to take care of themselves in that time period as well, right? Should we not be making sure that nurses take care of themselves by paying them to take care of themselves in that time period? And why do we do that? Because nurses who take care of themselves and who are able to do that in the environment that they work in provide excellent patient care, and patients have better and more positive outcomes when being taken care of by nurses who are taking care of themselves. So when we build that into our healthcare environments, what we're actually doing is promoting safe and effective patient care. Taking your well-being seriously. Again, you know, I said when I was building this presentation, I used myself as the example. I did not take my well-being seriously for a long time. And I can't say that I had any excuse. I had lots of phenomenal mentors, nurses who told me time in and time out, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. It's important. And it wasn't until I had some serious health scares that I realized that taking care of myself was more than just taking care of myself. It was actually about being well, living well, being a part of my children's lives, being a part of my patients' lives, connecting with them on a human-to-human level. And that takes me to my next piece, which is be human. In all of our nursingness, and I remember in nursing school being taught by one nurse who said, you know, once you put this nursing cap on, it never comes off. And I held on to that for such a long time until I realized that putting the nursing cap on didn't mean taking the human cap off. It meant adding to my caps that I wear. So we all wear many hats in our lives, right? Like we say in our bio, right? I wear the hat of a mother, the hat of a daughter, the hat of all of these important people to other people. But I also just wear the hat of being human. And so it's important to not lose that when we add new hats to it. And lastly, expect more. This is a big one. I know it looks small on the page, but expecting more, I think, has been my slogan this year. Expecting more, not just from ourselves and our colleagues, but expecting more from the world around us. I think it's important, and I think probably we see this in social media, at least from my literature review and looking at some of the things that nurses are talking about right now. There's a lot of discussion about the patients and patients' families and, you know, their expectations of nurses and our healthcare system. And I wonder, where did they get those expectations? Where did they learn what nurses were and what nurses can do or how they should behave? And where did they learn what our healthcare system was and how it should behave? They learned it from us. So we've established these expectations that nurses can do everything with nothing. We have established the ability to literally create a heavenly experience out of a box of tissues. I can remember going to some of my first shifts as a brand new nurse in ICU and being told by these amazing mentors, don't worry, we'll figure it out. We'll MacGyver it. Right? Nurses are great at MacGyvering stuff. We have entrepreneurial spirits. We are innovators. We are creatives. We are scientists, researchers. We are so many things to so many people. We have taught the public to expect a lot from us. But have we taught the public that we expect more from them? Have we taught the public that we expect them to show up for us and for our healthcare system? Have we advocated what holistic health actually looks like? Have we said, to give you holistic health, we need a healthcare workforce that looks like this, that is representative of our population, that is integrated in all aspects of how we live our lives? It reminded me, I had built this presentation a little while ago, and I went to my son's school to pick him up when he wasn't feeling good. And I said, well, what's wrong, bud? And he said, I have a headache. I was like, well, have you had enough to drink today? Because your water bottle's full. No, I didn't have time to drink today. Like, well, you need to have some water, bud. He's 8. You should know you need to drink some water. Now, nurses are not so good at remembering to drink water either. But it dawned on me as I was walking out of the school, where did school nurses go? Have we advocated to say that we expect more? We expect to have nurses back in places to bring balance to our system. How can we have a holistic view and a holistic workforce if we don't expect to have nurses where they're needed? Right? What about all those nurses who are phenomenal at working with young people on the social determinants of health? When did we stop advocating that that was an important part of nursing? Because those are our school nurses. We need to expect more. We need to expect more from our public, expect more from each other as advocates for all areas of nursing. When one nurse stands up and says, this isn't okay, my patients are being hurt, my colleagues are being hurt, all nurses should turn around and say, tell me more. We have to expect more from each other so that we can be human, so that we can take our well-being seriously, and so we can be good friends and good colleagues, which all of those are important in order to have a holistic view, I believe, and in order for us to be holistic beings for our well-being. And lastly, probably my most important part of a holistic view is that you matter. Every single person, every single nurse matters. There is a place in our world for us. And if you haven't heard it enough, I want you to hear it today. You matter. If you don't feel like you matter, reach out. I will tell you you matter. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Excellent talk. During the whole time, there's been some lively discussion in the chat, and maybe I'd like to go there first, just to pull out a couple of comments, as well as a couple of questions. The first comment comes from Nicole, who's asking when you had made the comment about finding that nurse colleague to reach out to talk to. She makes the comment about, you need to make sure that that person is open and receptive to that. Maybe could you address, how do you find that right peer or that right individual to to be that support for you professionally and personally?
Yeah, I would say specifically to the person who is like that stiff upper lip person, that seems to be who's gravitating into my chair now, because they're finding that you can only have a stiff upper lip for so long. And then it becomes apathy, and apathy leads to conflict, and conflict leads to an inability to work with colleagues and eventually needing to leave your job, or you have no friends. I would hope before it gets to that point that you can hopefully say to a colleague who's like that something along the lines of, I'm sorry that you feel that the things that are so important to me are not important. But if you ever need to talk about things that are bothering for you, I'm happy to listen. And then you walk away and you find someone like myself or another colleague who understands that every part of your life is important and influences your ability to work. There are lots of us out there, I promise.
There was also some discussion and a question from Lorelei about we as clinicians, like, how do you manage that tough emotional shift? Like, when we have some of these deep entrenched mindsets of being detached, like how do you address the emotional impact of a difficult shift, or like could you speak maybe to that as well?
Yeah. So that's actually something I've been struggling a lot with over the last 6 months or so. And it's why I'm so passionate about this idea that we have to ask for and expect more, demand more. It's also why I have to have realistic expectations for myself. If I only talk about the little hospital that I work with, I see my colleagues struggling and I know what they need. They need debrief, they need reflective time, and they need colleagues like myself who can help them both from a psychotherapeutic perspective, but also from an understanding what they're talking about perspective. Putting those two things together makes a huge difference in ending your shift in a different way than they are right now. But unfortunately, we don't have a healthcare system right now that recognizes that as being exceptionally important. There are programs like EAPs and things like that, and there are some really good therapists within those programs. I've met them, but I just can't quite navigate myself away from the idea that another nurse is the right person for that job. And that we should be and have systems built into place. And I think that's where the advocacy comes in. And maybe that'll be another project I take on at some point, but an advocacy for those types of positions, not accepting that EAP is enough, because it's not, especially not now, not in this system, not in the enormous cracks within our system. We really do need to have another nurse at the table to help run those debriefing sessions and manage those difficult end of shift conversations. And it really is an end of shift conversation. There is another, I wish I had it with me, but I was reading an article about a small hospital in the Netherlands that's implemented this staggered shift specifically for this purpose. So your shift, if you start at 7 a.m., let's say, ends at 6, the next shift comes on at 6, but then they have debriefing sessions at the end of every shift. So you are actually there from 6 to 7, but you're in a debrief reflective period with your colleagues at the end of that shift. And they said that besides well-being for the nurse going up significantly, patient outcomes and safety flags, they call them, safety flags decreased significantly during doing this, because so many issues that were being identified in these times and were being able to be fixed relatively quickly, because that's one of the things nurses are good at.
That's a really interesting comment. And as an educator as well, we do that for our students. We end their shift with a debriefing session, but yet when they transition into professional practice, that ends.
Yeah.
Your example is something taken out of nursing education that we do. It sounds like in the chat there was also examples from the NHS and from Australia that might do something similar to that. But it's a very interesting idea, putting in the debrief for the practicing clinician and the impact of that debrief as far as well-being and then the patient care outcomes. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going into the chat as well. I do have a question for you, something early on, and it was kind of a theme of your discussion when you had said, toughing, like nurses tough it out, and I see things in the chat like stiff upper lip and these mindsets that we have. From a well-being perspective, these are pretty damaging mindsets that have pretty deep roots in nursing as a profession, not just mental health nursing, but nursing in general. And maybe this is a psychotherapist type question, which is, again, you're the right person to ask it. How do you challenge, or bring about change of these damaging mindsets when they're so deeply entrenched in what is almost the fabric of being a nurse?
Yeah. I think that's a tough one. And actually, I have like 3 hats on at the moment that want to answer. They're all competing for time. So the educator hat in me says it's why I got into education, is we start with those who aren't in the profession yet, right? So if we want to make long-term change, we have to start with those who aren't in it yet. The second one is sort of my leadership hat that says, change management, going back to the theoretical aspects of how we promote change. Well, organizational change requires a leader who believes in an environment that doesn't tolerate the stiff upper lip. And I think somebody actually put in here, we have to address who we are bringing to those leadership roles and why they're there. I have been in a really privileged position to watch my mom as a new immigrant to Canada do nursing and then become a nurse leader and work her way up from, being an RNA to being the vice president of a Toronto hospital. And in all of that time, the one thing I got to learn and see firsthand in that and living vicariously through that was that she never once gave up that part of nursing that said, how does this impact our ability to care? And sometimes I think that leaders have lost that because they are sometimes forced to, in a lot of ways, refocus on how do we provide more with less. There's a lot of fiscal talk that happens at leadership tables. And it's one of the reasons why I have left a number of leadership positions over the last few years, because when the discussion becomes more fiscally focused without having the conversation also contain how that choice or decision is going to impact those that work within the system and those that have to receive care within the systems, then it's a useless conversation. And then my third hat, the psychotherapy hat, says that when you know better, you do better. And so we have to teach and we have to confront. And so one of the practices I learned in psychotherapy that I've carried into my world when I'm running into those personalities sometimes is that confrontation, compassionately confrontation, and say, I recognize that, this is how you've managed for so long. I can't manage that way. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't help me to be healthy or to provide care to my patients in a way that they need. But I have learned other ways. let me share with you, if you're willing to listen, some of the ways I've learned. And sometimes when you acknowledge that what they're saying isn't wrong from the time that they were taught, right? We're not saying you're bad. We're saying what you learned doesn't work for us anymore, right? Having the stiff upper lip doesn't work. I don't know if it did 30 or 40 years ago, but I know it doesn't now. But I want to acknowledge your feelings because they're valid. And I want you to acknowledge mine. And I'd like us to share. So I do a lot of confronting, which is probably why you either like me or you hate me. But I don't know how else to change the system. And I don't know how else to support those nurses because they're also suffering.
Thank you, Siobhan. Very thoughtful response. There was a couple of posts in the chat that I'd like to draw some attention to. One from Charlotte Ross about a article that she's worked on and is completed for peer review, or submitted for peer review, titled "What Nurse Elders Believe That Novice Nurses Need to Know About Managing Emotional Labor." Asking the experts. I'd be very interested. I think there's a lot of us that are very interested in finding out more about that. So Charlotte, maybe I would just ask, please keep the Federation in mind when you finally get notification of publication. I think many of us would like to find out more about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was also a comment from I think it's Matthew, and I hope I'm not saying Matthew. Maybe would you care to speak to the comment, Matthew?
I can do my best, but it was just that really it was that a lot of the, not even just our own leadership, but I do think actually leadership outside of healthcare systems seems to have this kind of pervasive idea of doing more with less, and that we kind of keep shifting this down onto healthcare workers, and that there's this like overarching understanding that everything has to do with a sort of a fiscal or financial responsibility, that everything is this cost. But we need to either radically shift our understanding as a population nationally that caring for individuals will always be a cost, but not one which we can expect profitable returns from. We don't need to be looking at this as if it is some sort of investment. The investment is health, which, I mean, there's enough evidence that's out there that supports that caring for healthcare providers and patients shows a better return on investment because they end up costing long-term less. So we need to stop looking at things in these short 4-year turnarounds. We actually, and then I know this is difficult because it's provincially, and I know that each of us where we are located is influenced by whichever political regime is in play. But there is this question of whether or not this needs to be a bit more, well, federally held, because it does need to be national, because across the board, we need to be caring for people no matter where they're at. And I know that we tout universal healthcare, but we also experienced how difficult that is to transition. So it's this conversation, like, how do we care for care providers? We need to start looking that care is necessary, required, and it is a cost that we should shoulder responsibly, like, and that we should take part in that and be happy that we are willing to take part in that and provide that resource for those that are less fortunate, because ultimately a rising tide lifts all boats. And that is how we need to be caring for people.
Well, we need to have, it's such a great comment, and I wholeheartedly agree. Having sat at some of those provincial and federal tables in those discussions, perspectives like that don't float. And I think, you know, to your point of we need change, I think the changes, and I know I'm harping on the same thing over and over again. Nobody understands that better than a nurse. What would happen if nurses who feel this way and who have the theoretical and experience, not just theoretical understanding of how fiscal management works and how resource management works and leadership and nursing and all of these things that make up the pieces of who could do this well, but also had the philosophical belief of true universal healthcare, which is really what we're talking about. What if they were the people that were in those decision-making capacity seats? What if they were the federal and the provincial healthcare decision makers? What if there was more of them in those positions than less? And right now we are business heavy in the decision-making area when it comes to healthcare, and very healthcare light, because most nurses don't go into business or politics, right? It's not an area that we went to school for. It's not what we wanted to be nurses for. But I'm starting to see that there's a path potentially for us. And it started with the federal government having a chief nursing officer again. It's also about finding the right nurses to be in those positions. And that does need to be a balance of old and new. We have so many generations of nurses working within the healthcare system right now. In order to get everyone on board, it seems that the best way forward is to have representation from all of those areas to be able to learn from the past mistakes and from our current ones, as we know we're certainly making enough of them. That's a great comment. Thank you.
And I saw Michelle had made a reply. Michelle, would you mind putting your question forward, or I can, because Siobhan, your response as far as that pathway forward for leadership within nursing kind of addresses Michelle's comment, which was she was wondering how to bring together the discrepancy or the gap that exists between what we teach student nurses and the experiences of being a worker within the healthcare system. So how do we actually address that change? And I hope I captured it, Michelle, but I'd give you the opportunity to speak more to your comment if you wish.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, yeah, because there is a gap. I work in professional practice in inpatient mental health, and it is quite, it's different, right? Like how we educate nursing students, what they experience when they're doing their clinical rotations and even in their preceptorship. And then when they actually get to the workplace and now they're a paid worker and they're part of this system. And it can be quite a difficult transition, especially when we don't have a lot of resources put into supporting new graduates, particularly in mental health services. So yeah, just wondering about that. And I guess the gap between like research and evidence and having everything evidence informed when you're in school, and then the reality is that when you work in mental health, you're probably going to be working in inpatient acute mental health care, which it doesn't like match up sometimes. So yeah, just wondering about that.
Gosh, I hope not. I really, really think, well, and then again, I'm the wrong person to ask about this, but for me, mental health is in the community. That's where it starts, and that's where the majority of the work needs to be. If somebody's in an inpatient mental health facility, they're in crisis. So, there's limited stuff that you can do in crisis because you're just trying to save the person. You're trying to stabilize, and the bulk of the work in mental health is outside of those inpatient units, and we don't have enough nurses doing it. And nurses do this in such a special way. I can't tell you how important it is for nurses to get back out into the community doing this work. And most importantly, my mentor, who was a psychiatric nurse, taught me how important it was for the nurses who are working in inpatient mental health to also be working in community health, because they see that transition period, and their patients, oh my God, their patients do so much better when they have that continued nursing contact from inpatient and outpatient. But I digress. Back to your your point about education is such a good one. It's one of the reasons why when my college, my Polytechnic, when they were looking for people to build the nursing curriculum for the standalone BScN programs, I put my hand up. Did I really have time to do it? No, but I really truly believe in what you're saying, that there's a huge disconnect. There's a gap between what we teach and what we do. And there are ways to build education that minimize that gap. It's one of the reasons why, here's the best question I ever asked sitting at the table. There's 12 or 14 nursing educators sitting around this table talking about building this curriculum. And they're like, okay, so when they go to clinical and there's, 6 or 8 students, and I'm like, hold on. Who said clinical had to be in a group? Why did we decide that was the best way to learn nursing? Why did we decide that one mentor / teacher / whatever you call them with 6, 7, 8, 10 nursing students running around on a unit or somewhere was the way that nurses learn nursing the best? And they're like, well, I don't know. That's just what we've always done. I was like, okay, but is that the best way for nurses to learn nursing? Because let's be honest, that clinical experience is where the gap gets narrowed, right? It's not in the classroom. We can't narrow the gap between theory and practice in the classroom, but we narrow the gap between theory and practice at the bedside in the clinical area.
For like the first 5 days, like that's a must.
Oh,
So the Tylenol is every day.
So yeah, in clinical is where we narrow that gap. And so my advocation at that table was, well, what does the literature say first? Because we're evidence informed, so let's start there. Well, the literature says that nurses learn best when they are learning one-to-one with another nurse. Okay, so if that's how nurses learn best, why do we not do that? And the feedback I got was, well, because we do it in the very last semester. But why do we do it when they're already done learning? Why do we not do it when they're starting learning? Why do we not do it when they need the protection and the guidance and all of those things? And then I took this to a provincial table where I was told, well, we can't financially afford to do it. Well, why not? Well, because nurses don't want to do it. Why do nurses want to do it? Why does that have anything to do with money? Well, we'd have to pay them. I was like, well, yeah, you would. Because nurses should get paid for educating and for mentorship and for all the things that they do that requires brain and physical activity. Well, we can't afford it. I was like, well, you can't afford not to. Because what we're producing is nurses who have a huge gap in what we should do theoretically and what we are doing in clinical. And what we have right now is also nurses who have experience and have forgotten the theory because they are so run off their feet doing the doing. They don't have time to do the thinking. So we need to pull back. We need to give nurses more of time to do the thinking, time to do the mentorship, and we need to pay them to do it. And we need to put those together with nurses who are learning. So we need to go back to the models where precepted, 1 to 2, max 2 maybe nurses, that seems to be in the literature the most effective model, with a nurse who's getting paid to be that mentor, to be that support person for the entirety of their nursing education. In every piece of literature that I've read and in every nurse that I've talked to that has experienced that kind of model, not only did they experience less of that gap, but the nurse who did the mentorship actually also reported huge learning because it gave them that reciprocal knowledge of reinvesting in the theory of why we do things and reinvesting in the evidence-informed piece of why we do things. Because students are great for calling you out when you're doing something just because, right? They're great at saying, well, why are you doing that? That's not what we read about, right? So it brings you back to okay, well, you're right. I haven't actually read about what the most recent evidence of this is in the last 5 years. It closes that gap.
I'd like to draw our attention to a post from Dr. Stenhouse. Hi, Rosie. Great to see you. Just to sometimes the solution isn't an internal solution. Sometimes you have to look outside the system for ideas. And Dr. Stenhouse brings the Scottish perspective or the NHS perspective. When you talk about the 2,300 hours, are most of those preceptored hours, or is it still in a group? And could you address your comment a little bit?
Okay, so yes, so we do 2,300 hours of practice across for us 4 years. Right, sorry, so I got muted again. Is that okay? Yeah. So we so the 2,300 hours is over the 4 years or the 3 years of the programme. It's in clinical placement areas, so it might be wards, it might be with district nurses, health visitors, community mental health nurses, care homes, a whole range of settings. And each student we have a system where we don't call it precepting, we call it preceptorship actually when we have the newly graduated nurse and they go into practice, and that's supporting that transition into the role as an autonomous qualified nurse. So the students, when they're out in practice, they have a practice supervisor. So each practice supervisor will generally only have one student. They may not always be on shift with the student, but the student would be expected, the other staff there would be expected to work with that student. And then there's also a practice assessor who is not then responsible really for the teaching of the student, but has conversations with the student, with the practice supervisor. There's also some we have responsibility for getting feedback from patients as well, if that's possible, on their interactions with the student in making the assessment of the student. And each clinical placement is then assessed. Students have to pass their placements if there are difficulties and somebody maybe hasn't developed the levels of competence. We have a whole string of competencies that they have to pass. Then they would have a repeat placement, and there's additional support put in and support plans. But this is mandatory across the UK, so it's a part of all UK nurse education. So all UK nurses are degree educated in universities and all have these 2,300 hours clinical practice. In recent years, some of that's become simulated practice because of the challenges of capacity. But yeah.
So welcome back, everybody, to our panel discussion. Now, we have 3 panelists joining us. We have Carissa McEachern, who's online as well. We have Dr. Rosie Stenhouse, who's online, and Dr. Victoria Smee. What we're going to do is give each panelist about approximately 20 minutes to do their individual presentation, and then we're going to do the introductions and the presentations just back to back to back in that format. At the end, then we can have a panel Q&A or a group Q&A and discussion on any of the content that was presented by our panelists. So first up, we have Dr. Rosie Stenhouse, who's going to be presenting, doing a presentation titled Skills and Resources for Well-Being, Being While Navigating Complex Professional and Organizational Issues. Dr. Stenhouse qualified as a mental health nurse in 1992 and has worked across inpatient, community, and NGO settings. She is currently a senior lecturer and head of nursing studies in the School of Health and Social Science at the University of Edinburgh, as well as a visiting assistant professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Maribor in Slovenia. Her mental health teaching draws on social science, arts, humanities, to engage students with service user experience and consider the complexity of mental health related experiences in the social, cultural, and political contexts of people's lives. A strong thread of social justice drives her research and current projects, which include leading on issues around ethical engagement for the Realities Project, which is a large project focused on improving people's experiences of community-based health and social care systems in Scotland. Also leading a research capacity building project in Ghana focused on healthcare professionals and academics, and involvement in the project focused on developing a system for psychosocial support for young people who've experienced stroke. So welcome, Rosie, to the Education Day. I'll turn it over to you.
So thank you anyway for inviting me to speak. It's a real honour to join you on your Mental Health Nurses Day. And my presentation, as Dawn says, is going to focus on skills and resources for wellbeing, while navigating some of the issues that I'm going to also then draw out, which I think create the capacity for burnout. So I'm going to start by thinking about, are these slides big enough? Can you see the writing? Can you read the slides? I'm just worrying that it looks quite small to me. Well, I'll carry on. If you can't read the slides, if somebody would just tell me, I can't see you, so it would be really useful if somebody just tells me. So I'm going to start anyway by thinking about these challenges that mental health nurses negotiate. And I'm going to think about three particular areas. So discursive tensions in the mental health system, the mental health nursing and nature of mental health nursing and emotional labour, and then organisational issues. And I'm going to then talk about possible ways forward, so the resources and the skills that we might develop at the level of the individual organisation, and then sort of policy, government and discourse. But I thought it would be really useful to think about actually what is the issue? What are we talking about? Why is self-care and looking after ourselves and mental health nurses' well-being, why is this an issue that we need to attend to? And for me, I guess ultimately the issue becomes burnout and actually then loss of nurses to our profession and to our healthcare systems. And burnout is something which is identified in various systematic reviews, and I've put data here from Lopez and Lopez, whose meta-analysis identified that the three different aspects of burnout, that emotional exhaustion was 25% and low personal accomplishment were 22%. So these are quite high rates of aspects of burnout that people are experiencing. And Tang and colleagues in their work found a significant correlation between perceived organisational support and burnout. And that becomes particularly useful to think about when we're thinking about what organisations in particular might do to support their staff and improve the situation. So the first challenge that I'll briefly identify is one that grows out of the history of our mental health systems. And I'm assuming to some extent that the UK history of mental health and psychiatric systems is somewhat similar to that of your own psychiatric systems. And so historically, psychiatric systems primarily operated a population management function, separating the mad from the rest of the population through, at sort of some point in the 1800s, the admission to asylums, which were defined as total institutions by Goffman and still continued to exist well into the late 1900s. So, you know, the last institution in Scotland closed in the 1990s. And these total institutions, which were identified by Goffman in the 1960s, had these impermeable boundaries, meaning that there was little or no interaction with the communities in which these institutions were situated. And the purpose of these institutions was risk management, primarily the management of risk to the population. And nurses, they weren't generally called nurses then, they were often called attendants, who worked in the asylums, were contextually situated in this discourse. And nursing as such was focused on physical management of patients or inmates. And we can see here, I put a picture of the film made of Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as something that probably we all recognise as an example of that period. Oh. And then if we move forward to our present systems, we find that the primary discourses are those of recovery. And here you can see a picture of Pat Deegan, who's one of the key sort of founders, I suppose, of this concept, and therapeutic relationships. And this discourse positions nurses as working with patients through therapeutic person-centered relationships towards patients' realisation of their potential. Quite a different discourse from that of management of a population and segregation, and a very different discourse to that even of 30 years ago when I trained. However, whilst we talk now of recovery and think in terms of therapeutic relationships, the traces of the discourse of risk are still evident in the function of the mental health system, which continues to function in a protecting way protecting the population from those who are identified as having mental disorder or mental illness. And so that function remains. And it's operationalised through our mental health acts. And the key point here is really that despite the shifts in mental health discourse from one of explicit population management to one of therapeutic intent, the populational risk management discourse remains, albeit less foregrounded. And this means that as nurses, as mental health nurses, we are working in a context where we are both looking to work in partnership with people, listen to their stories, their hopes, plan with them how they might attain some of these, and thinking about these same people in terms of risk, such that we're constantly watching and assessing for signs that we might need to act to manage that risk. And this need, I think, to work between these two opposing discourses creates dissonance for us, and it poses significant ethical and therefore emotional challenges. So that's one set of challenges posed by these sort of institutional discourses, if you like. And then the next challenge that I identify is the extensive emotional labour required by the work that mental health nurses do nowadays to manage these therapeutic relationships, which are central to our role. And emotional labour, a concept identified by Hochschild in the 1980s, involves the nurse in the management of their own emotional state, for instance, suppressing emotions or acting in a way that's incongruent with their inner emotional state, in order to produce that required emotional state in patients and arguably also their families. And this work is mostly invisible, and yet it can be intense and leave the nurse emotionally exhausted. And studies have identified that where there's no action to support the nurse to recover from this emotional labour, that this can lead to burnout. So again, here we have something that's central to our role, that's invisible, and that if not attended to, if we don't get support with it, then it can create issues of burnout as well, with the consequences for the profession. And then organisational issues, so lack of human resource, poor working environments, so the balance of work demands versus resource, the amount of control that nurses experience of their work environment, of their workload, their role clarity, the level of support that's available to them, all contribute, as does bullying and harassment. And the evidence would tell us that bullying and harassment exists, across the nurse workforce, but that nurses and healthcare practitioners who belong to minoritised groups, and particularly Black and minority ethnic groups, experience increased levels of bullying and harassment. We then have issues with poor work-life balance, which are exacerbated by long shifts, and here I'm thinking about sort of 13-hour shifts, but also within the UK, certainly rotational shifts, so going from these long day shifts to then doing night shifts and back onto day shifts, and sometimes that occurs within a single week. Low rates of pay and presenteeism. So these are all factors which are organisational factors which feed into the burnout that's experienced by nurses. So then thinking about what might we do about this, and I don't have any kind of magic wand. It's interesting. I listen to the other presentations and I think, oh yeah, I'm going to say that and I'm going to say that, and I think nothing that I'm going to say will be new to you. Nothing that I'm going to suggest will be new to you. I think one of the things I would say, though, is that I absolutely don't believe that the responsibility for dealing with the burnout crisis rests with individuals. I wonder about the ethics of requiring individuals to change their lifestyle, develop skills, resources to enable them to be more resilient and continue to work within a system which places increasing amounts of pressure on them and doesn't provide support. So I think there are ethical issues about the sort of quite neoliberalist argument that actually it's about individuals developing their resilience. However, there are things that we can do at an individual level, as long as these are then considered in the round with other organisational and policy level actions as well, which I think are really important and which also speak to the complexity of the issues that cause the burnout in the first place. And so one of the things I think we can do when we're thinking about emotional labour is kind of surfacing that prevalence of emotional labour. So making it visible, talking about it, recognising it, making it all right to speak about. And so here we start to sort of see the crossover between individual level actions and organisational actions, as there is a responsibility on leaders within clinical areas and within clinical services to develop safe spaces which enable people to then be able to talk about the emotional impact of their work in a safe environment. Developing increased emotional awareness and emotion management skills, again, can be really useful. A lot of the time we are experiencing our work, we're just getting on with our work. We're not necessarily thinking about the impact of that work emotionally on us. And so it can be really useful to start to track that impact. And I've put here on the right-hand side of the slide, you know, we can use sort of CBT type diary approaches to begin to really unpick some of our emotional experiences and work. So thinking about, you know, the emotion that occurs, but then what was happening? So what was the event that occurred that this emotion is attached to? What kind of thoughts were there around about that? What action, physical reaction and action did you have? And then in a sort of CBT way, thinking about, okay, so this was this series of events. How might I change that a little bit? You know, how might I change the actions that occur in this situation? Clinical supervision, I think we probably all have worked in services, I would imagine, where clinical supervision takes, you know, is available in some form or other. It has come in and gone out of fashion, I suspect, over the years, certainly over the 30-odd years that I've been practicing. And it can take individual form, it can take group form. I think the important thing with clinical supervision is that, again, that it develops that safe space where you are not, where there's not going to be any comeback, I guess, for making yourself vulnerable as a clinician and talking about difficult situations, so that then it's effective in enabling you to process and engage with and understand the impact of your work. And likewise, you know, there was a discussion earlier about sort of the debriefing, and debriefs after sort of critical incidents particularly is really, really useful as well. And then something that I've become more aware of, but I guess the mindfulness movement has been around for a very long time, but kind of an embodied engagement with emotions. If we think that, you know, if we follow some of the theoretical work and the neurobiological work, thinking about emotions and the body and how emotion, and usually talking about it in terms of trauma, but then actually we could consider some of the continual stresses that we experience as traumas, particularly given the dissonance that it may create. And these are held in the body. And people like Peter Levine, for instance, who's developed somatic experiencing, which one of my PhD students is using with ICU and E&E nurses, looking at their ability to take the skills related to that to manage their emotional experience during sort of critical situations in the clinical area, is certainly sort of making me think about the potential for ways, embodied ways of exploring this as well. So for those of you who are interested, you might be interested in looking further at that. Breathing, you know, in the moment, in the situation we're in, you know, taking a deep breath into our stomach, you know, gets rid of some of the tension, can ground us in times when actually our autonomic nervous system is becoming aroused, and we need to gain some control of that. And then we will all have at times come across the advice for and the huge amount of evidence in relation to diet and sleep and exercise and sort of work-life balance. And the fact that we should be thinking about all of these things, and yet actually often the structures which exist within organisations make that really difficult. I've already talked about, for instance, the shift structure. So how does that impact people's sleep? How does that impact people's ability to exercise or to have a nutritional diet, or actually to socialise and have social time as well? So this again is where the individual level and the ability to instigate and persist and make some of these things effective is connected to other things that happen in the organisation and other changes that might need to be made. So at the organisational level, what can we think about? Well, culture matters. The culture of the organisation and leadership, therefore, is really important. And we've already heard about that over the past couple of hours as well. So thinking about how do we develop cultures where learning and support are central to those, and making it easier for people to talk about the impact of their work on them, but equally creating cultures of learning from near misses and incidents that occur, which also then enable people to feel more secure and safer. Taking break entitlements, we know that in the UK, for instance, nurses often don't take their break entitlements, often can't even find time to go to the loo. So these kinds of things as well, developing a culture where, it's okay to take your lunch break, it's okay to take your morning break, except in exceptional circumstances, perhaps, where you really can't do that. And presenteeism, again, this is a cultural thing. It's about expectations, and it's about enabling people to feel that it's okay to take the time they need when they need to recover or when they're ill, so that then when they come back to work, they are well and they're able to contribute better. Perceived organisational support, so how much the organisation is perceived as being supported of us, is very much connected to how valued we feel as a nurse or an employee. And it's very, it's things like, for instance, opportunities to get training, to do professional development stuff, thinking even about things like availability of hot food, or access to facilities like tea, coffee making facilities, toilets, things like that, which are actually basic needs, but which sometimes are not actually available or terribly available to staff. And then it might also be about support programs, so the kinds of things that would offer support to people during the working day. But then we also need to make sure that actually people have long enough breaks or have the time to be able to engage with these things. Certainly the experience during COVID that a lot of these systems were set up, but that actually staff reported that they couldn't get away from the wards. And that wasn't just because of COVID, that was a normal thing. And then, so provision of resources. We're working in a kind of a restricted budget context at the moment. We're also working in a context where actually there just aren't enough nurses globally. And so our resources are tight, but are there opportunities to think about how we develop and manage processes to make them more efficient, to reduce the burden on the staff that we have, and to enable, but without impacting the quality of the care that's being provided. And then thinking about the impact of shift patterns. And I kind of have been party to and on the fringes of a lot of discussions about shift patterns over the years, but nothing seems to have changed. And there continues to be a lot of evidence developed around about the impact, for instance, on patient care towards the end of these long shifts, but equally on staff well-being. And given that the nursing workforce is primarily female, and that women are most often the primary caregivers for children or for older people, then flexibility in shift patterns might well facilitate well-being of staff and staff retention. And then thinking about sort of higher level yet, things that we might do. And I talked about the discourse and the tensions between the two discourses. And I think even an acknowledgement of the tensions that exist within the mental health system between the two risk and therapeutic discourses would enable discussion to begin and to start in that space, and the potential for then looking at how do we bridge that gap or reduce the tension or the gap. What kind of policy or innovations need to happen to begin this? But without acknowledging and again, without engaging with these discourses, it's not easy to move forward from that. And then pay and reward. I think it's really important that nurses are valued by being paid a wage that makes them feel that they feel is realistic for the job, the work that they are doing. And within the UK, NHS charities, so charities that are part of the NHS trusts and NHS boards, so usually provide money for patient-facing research or services. They're setting up food banks or already providing food banks for NHS healthcare staff. And in 2023, there was a statement to the House of Lords in the UK that reported on a survey by the Covell Nurses Trust, which had found that 14% of nurses and health workers were using food banks to feed themselves and their families, and nearly 70% were either unprepared or very unprepared for a financial emergency. So I think there's evidence that this really needs looked at. There's also been some sort of political action as well, but in terms of strikes and things, but there has not been necessarily the moves required on that. So these are the actions that I think we can take, some of them individual, some of them organisational, and some of them are things that we need to advocate for and push for through policy and changing in discourse, and looking and examining things that likes of the mental health legislation, for instance, that we use. So I'm aware of time. Just quickly then to conclude, the challenges to mental health nurse wellbeing, I think, are multifaceted and they're interconnected. So this is a complex issue. It can't be resolved by actions by only one or two specific groups of stakeholders. It requires action at different levels to be taken by different groups of stakeholders. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's something that we need to keep pushing for and we need to keep working at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie, for a great presentation. As I stated previously, we'll just move into the next panelist discussion or presentation, and then the next, and then we'll have a joint Q&A at the end. It's my pleasure to introduce our second panelist, Dr. Victoria Smee. Victoria is an associate professor and director of the Arthur Labatt Family School of Nursing at Western University. The goal of her research is to promote health equity focused in the areas of mental wellness and Indigenous health. Victoria completed research her completed research includes studies of the wellness narratives of Indigenous women and men and the examination of those factors that both facilitate and challenge people's ability to access equitable, safe, and effective healthcare. Currently, she's studying how to promote equity-oriented mental health, healthcare, culturally safe, harm reduction, trauma and violence-informed care within and between mental health institutions and community agencies. Victoria is also a mother of 3 and grandmother of 6. So welcome, Victoria, to the panel discussion. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, hello. Thanks, Don, for that introduction. And it's really wonderful to be here today. I'm hoping you can see my, my slides. Thank you. And thank you for the invite. Been a mental health nurse now for, well, almost 54 years. So that really does date me. And I've loved really almost every minute of it. So it is really great to be here. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Western University, where I'm sitting right now, is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wauk, and Adirondack peoples on lands connected with the London Township Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. So this place is now home to many diverse Indigenous peoples and including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So, thank you. I'll continue. So, this is a presentation I come to today really as a nurse researcher, educator, and administrator at this time, after spending my first 20 plus years in nursing and clinical practice. And so this has been a kind of a new career over the last 25 plus years. And so I do speak with that voice today. As Dionne mentioned earlier, and I'm using the same, I haven't spoken to Dionne, I really haven't, but I'm speaking with the same kind of imagery, which is we need to put our mask on first in order to take care of others. And Rosie, I really appreciated your presentation because and providing the contextual features of what we're kind of our challenges, what we're dealing with, and then some of the ways in which we can move forward. And so I would start with our self-awareness, tracking our own feelings, thoughts, needs, and influencers. And that is taking care of self first. And my own ways of doing that are multiple. I have wonderful colleagues, which I show up here that I'm hugging because they are very important to this presentation because of the work that we've done together and also our longstanding friendship. So our relational engagement is hugely important to me. Yoga, I used to be a paraglider, but not really a serious paraglider. Colleen Varco got me into it, and I'll speak about Colleen's work a little bit. But that was very healthy for me, contrary to what people might think when you're flying off a mountain. But it was very, very helpful to me and healthy for me. I work out, and I have a fabulous family. So I'm very fortunate. So I'm going to begin by talking about this social justice and mental health nursing, because for me, it is my belief that nursing's social mandate for the 21st century is health equity. And so we start with that social justice mandate, health as a human right, with a focus on health outcomes as an object of social justice. And this really important shift from an individualistic approach, which we've talked about a lot today, towards action, these actions that are organizational or structural, systemic. So to pointing to those intersecting factors that are the conditions that really do impact health. These conditions are historically and socially mediated, as we know, and they impact health and human suffering. And I'm going to mention a couple of the challenges of this work that I'm just going to change my little thing here because it's getting in my way. I can't see. So housing itself as a basic right and human requirement for good health. This is such an important area in mental health. So it has been one of our challenges because it's a huge organizational challenge, because the people that we work with need resources, and often those resources aren't at the tips of our fingers. There are two trends that are largely responsible for the rise of homelessness over the past 20 years. In Canada, and that is a growing shortage of affordable rental housing and a simultaneous increase in poverty. And here in London, we have a very strong anti-poverty coalition with the belief that poverty needs to be eradicated. Some people roll their eyes. That's absolutely impossible. I actually believe that the scarcity discourse or narrative around this takes us from our focus, which should be organizational, systemic, structural, and moving resources to places where they need to be. I really don't. I said this earlier on the chat. I don't buy into a scarcity narrative. We move money where we have value in our governments. So we know that people with lived experience of mental health and addictions conditions are disproportionately affected by homelessness. So that's one of our challenges. So if you look at these statistics, this is what's been happening in Canada over the last several years. And I don't know whether that's the case where you are, Rosie, and others, but it definitely is the case here that there is a growing problem of homelessness. And despite our research linking mental health and physical health to housing, there's too often a kind of decontextualizing of the problem, and that lands on the people who actually are homeless or living in near homeless situations. The other thing that comes in here, and I just want to point to it on the side here, is that in an Indigenous context, this is often many Indigenous communities, the medicine wheel is used, and this is one rendition of the medicine wheel. So there's a real integration of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. I think all of us here believe this, but our systems of care don't necessarily embrace this. And as such, our services reflect kind of a disconnection from, for example, housing and mental health issues, poverty and homelessness, etc. And then, of course, I'm just mentioning a few challenges here, but also mental health stigma that we're very aware of. So this little quote comes from a study in which was one of my first studies, where I was interviewing an Indigenous man who was also diagnosed with HIV. He was Indigenous. And so his point to me was, you know, I've already got all these other things. I'm not going to go and be labeled as having a mental health issue also. He already felt very disempowered by our systems of care. And so he didn't feel safe there. In addition, biomedical approaches to mental illness tend to sometimes be deficit focused rather than strength-based focused. And not people-centered necessarily. I mean, all of us understand this, but when we're making changes, we're often not looking to the institutions and structures. Instead, we're looking to the individual. And so what our research has really stressed is that we need to be looking more broadly at these systems and structures in an ongoing way. Yes, individual factors are really important, but unless we do that, we're missing the mark. And I think many of you have talked about that in relation to the care of nursing itself, to those systems and structures that keep us in a place of overwork, discussions about shortages, etc., that impact our lives and our work. So people often think about health and wellness in terms of physical health, that is healthy eating, regular exercise, sleep, etc. But I'm sure, as you know, it's so much more, as we know from our own lives as nurses. It's health and wellness are often attributed to lifestyle and a personalized approach or choices regarding living life in a way that supports achieving our potential. Although this is really true in many, many ways, it ignores the contextual factors that also shape health and wellness, including inequity, that we all have talked about today. In this presentation, I presented what I've learned from my research regarding the importance of addressing inequity to support healing, health, and wellness, and the important part each of us can play to do this, ways that support our own well-being. Our transformative agenda is underpinned by what we learned in research. So first, we all know the difference between equity and equality. And so I'm just underlining here that health equity is the absence of avoidable or remedial differences in health among groups of people. It is not equality, it's rather equity. And we can address inequity in our society. We have the skills and we have the abilities to do this. The research, there's just a few areas of research in which we came to the equity work and built on the equity work together. And so some of the studies that I've been involved are listed here, but I would like to underline my colleagues that have really shaped my own perspective and some of this work. Annette Brown and Colleen Barco at UBC, Marilyn Ford Gilbo, Nadine Wathen here at Western. Patria, I see you're here, and I'm just so happy to see you, Patria Taylor in New Brunswick. Other people like Jill Muxlow, who's done tremendous work in this area. She's also here. And Charlotte Ross, a colleague and student that now no longer a student for many, many years. But that's how I met Charlotte, and just the tremendous work that you're doing in this area. So the key dimensions, what we came up with through the research and through decades of research actually now, the work of Colleen Barco started way back in 1995, where she was really looking at those factors that actually shape inequity. And then we moved to the key dimensions, looking at the key dimensions of equity-oriented care by looking in primary care at clinics that were offering services to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks. And we came up with, over time, and the research, 3 dimensions, key dimensions of equity-oriented care. So care that needed to be trauma and violence informed, harm reduction, and what we're more recently calling substance use health, and cultural safety, anti-racism work. And these are tools developed into tools for us to help actually address inequity in our work, and for my work in the area of mental health. So one of the 10 strategies here are explicitly committing to equity, developing supportive organizational structures, policies, and processes, which have been mentioned several times today, re-envisioning our use of time, attending to power differentials, including power differentials between staff, nurses, leadership, etc., tailoring care programs and services to local context. Every community is not the same. Actively countering racism and discrimination, stigma included, mental health stigma. Actively seeking input from community partners. I only do my work in partnership, as do my colleagues. Tailoring care to address interrelated forms of violence and enhancing access to social determinants of health. And again, and this one on the bottom is actually very important, optimizing the use of place and space so it is culturally safe. And what we found in the equity, one of our studies that was a longitudinal study with 395 patients called the EQUIP study, we found that there is a pathway between equity-oriented care and better patient outcomes over time. We also found that it was way healthier for the people working in those environments. And so, we saw that quality of life measures, quality of life improved. There were fewer trauma symptoms. There were less disabling chronic pain and less depression. So we really saw that equity-oriented work really did work. It has great potential in our environment, and created all kinds of tools, because what nurses told us was that they needed to have tools to use in their work. They needed to have tools right at their fingertips to be able to work in a good way with their clients. And again, it not only helped the people they were working with, but it helped themselves to be able to resource people in these ways. And these resources in my reference list, there's the EQUIP site is there, and you'll see all kinds of fabulous resources as action kits for organizations, for example, to look at how they might shift to become more equity oriented. That is trauma and violence informed, culturally safe, and embracing harm reduction / substance use health approaches. And again, there are a bunch of things. There's learning tools, there's action tools, there's evaluation tools, all kinds of, even an equity walkthrough. So the equity walkthrough is a tool to help people walk through their organization to see the ways in which they might actually change the environment in which they're working, change the structures in which they're working. In one of our studies, I was a facilitator, and actually in one of our organizations, people wanted to look at their harm reduction policy and actually shifted their harm reduction policy. That led to the shifting of a room where they provided methadone maintenance treatment to folks. And it was just a terrible, shabby room. And people originally were kind of like, well, you know, this room is, you know, people come here from the street, it might get ruined, etc. But they took this up, they shifted the room, and there was such a response by people to the invitational approach that was created in this environment, the way in which people were addressing just even the space, the time that they took with patients, etc. It made a difference. Here are just some of the tools again that are on the site. I really invite you to go there. I think it's very helpful. It's certainly been helpful to me in my own work to go in and use these tools. And we have taken these tools, by the way, into nursing education and have embedded them within our nursing curriculum. The students find it very, very helpful. We also took the notion of trauma and violence informed care and have been using it as a lens to our whole curriculum. That is, we looked at our learning outcomes. We looked at all of our curricula to see how we might integrate these approaches throughout. This is not a perfect science, and we're not there yet, but we've been working very hard to engage with this work in a good way. I just want to show you this briefly. These men were members at that time of the Dudes Club. And the Dudes Club is a club in the downtown east side of Indigenous men. And these men were part of a study that I was very grateful to co-lead, entitled Indigenous Men's Narratives of Health. So those things that created wellness for them, pointing to the obvious things. Housing, they wanted to have safe and clean, comfortable housing. They wanted food that was, nutritious food, etc. They wanted each other. They wanted to have connections with each other. So the messages from the work, the equity work were, in that particular study, was safe and stable housing, healthy food is a priority need. These are structural issues. These are system issues. These are the things that Paul Farmer points to, that when they are not provided is actually a form of structural violence in our society, where people are not given access to these things that we just tend to take for granted. Safe connections with others, including health and social service providers. Culture is healing for people, connecting people to those things that are meaningful to them in terms of their healing processes. Educational opportunities with mentorship, meaningful occupation, including employment and volunteer opportunities. Gender-specific resources, a very important issue, and aging is an important factor. For example, the men could no longer do some of the work they had done as young men, the heavy lifting work, etc. And they needed to be offered employment that they actually was meaningful, both meaningful, but also that they were able to engage with in a good way. And so in terms of nursing education, so my last point, I hope I have a moment. Is that okay with you, Dionne? Am I all right? I just want to say, I think in terms of education, this has been extremely important for learning for myself, as both I was a clinician, as I said, for many years, as a nurse educator, researcher, and administrator. That we branded right away over the last few years. And when I arrived 7 years ago, we decided to brand ourselves in a particular way and live to that branding. And that is to really educate leaders in health equity, nurses who could transform, to be transformative in practice, that the social determinants of health were absolutely essential, underpinning the program and every part of our curricula. That advocacy and voice were huge. They go into the environment, as many of you mentioned earlier, they go into the practice environment, and it's very hard to have a voice as a student nurse. everybody knows this. And so it's really about how we help our students to engage in that environment in a good way. That means we have to have strong alliances with our practice partners, which we created, by the way. Siobhan, I just loved what you had to say, and we have engaged now with a one-to-one preceptorship model in nursing in our program across all of the practice experience, except for the first one, which is in long-term care. And just don't have enough preceptors there. But our practice partners have worked with us in very close partnership to make this a reality. And so far, the data looks very, very good. So it's both a great experience, not only for the preceptor, but for our students who have a sense of belonging in that environment. And also, it gives us an opportunity to together deal with the systems and structures that can be so oppressive. And so we're building this together with our practice partners, debrief sessions, and that opportunity for the theory practice nexus conversation. And again, working in partnership. And I am a researcher, and so here at Western, we really have been working with students to look at ways in which we can build research more fully into undergraduate education. Of course, it already sits within graduate education very fully, but undergraduate education, they do get research, but we need to embed it more fully so they have some more tools, again, for being able to shift the conversation, shift the culture, and get people excited about nursing again. I think that is just about it, other than to say, you know, for myself, and going back to my own self-reflection, my nursing work and everything I do now and for many, many years has about living with compassion and kindness. I'm not perfect in this. To have a just society, we need to realize human rights, leaving no one behind. No one. That includes us as providers. That the central promise of the sustainable, it is a central promise of sustainable development goals, and everyone should have enough food, quality of health, care, and education. All kinds of discrimination must end, and daily life is where a just society begins. So there are a few things you can do. Stand up for gender equality, teach children about equality, sponsor a scholarship, fundraise for schools, support a food bank, model self-care, advocate for quality healthcare, understand and help reduce mental health stigmas, champion accessibility and inclusion, know your rights. A world working together is a healthy planet. And I just want to say that this work energizes me. It is also part of my own healing and well-being. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smee, for an excellent presentation. Our final panelist is Carissa McEachran, doing a presentation entitled Tools and Techniques to Augment Nurses' Well-Being as Members of the Critical Care of the Circle of Care. For the past 14 years, Carissa has been employed with the Occupational and Critical Incident Stress Management Program with Health Canada. As an assistant coordinator, she works nationally with mental health professionals, nurse managers, practice consultants, and frontline nurses to deliver healthcare services focused on nurses' well-being. This frontline service allows for immediate support, maintaining mental health, and contributing to the retention of nurses working in First Nations communities. She also enjoys working with the corporate services branch, mental health team for Health Canada on a second secondment, supporting public servants' mental health by utilizing evidence-based care practices. So welcome, Carissa, to the panel discussion. I'll turn it over to you.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
And can you see my slideshow? That's the important thing.
Yep.
And then the last thing to ask is right here, making sure that it is running properly. Good.
go.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. It's always a difficult. I feel like I'm with Rosie when she talks about technology and doing presentations and the different media platforms that are out there when we share our presentations. So thank you again. I think everybody has just leaded me into my presentation because how Siobhan was talking, Rosie, Victoria talking about peer support. That's this program. This is a peer support program. So I'm just delighted to be able to present on our service lines. And as mentioned by Dawn, that it is for nurses working in First Nations communities nationally. So again, if a nurse that is on the line isn't from one of the communities, but it still applies. Peer support still applies, as Siobhan is speaking to it. They're looking out for your own EAP services and seeing what that is what is available. And the other thing is that, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the wellness again, individual wellness as ways that we can develop. So awesome, thank you. I'm going to refer to occupational and critical incident stress management as OCISM for short, for the just you know, it's a long it's a long title. But first, I would like to acknowledge where I am. So I'm here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm gathered on the ancestral lands and Treaty 1 territory for Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So thank you for inviting me. Health Canada, occupation, OCISM, EAP service, and this is where I am speaking that it is any nurse working in the communities, in First Nations community. It doesn't matter if it is a mental health nurse, and congratulations on Mental Health Day. You guys are awesome. Thank you for the work that you do. And then go back to the nursing, it doesn't, the mental health nurse, it can be an RPN, LPN, Indigenous Service Canada is the federal government that goes into the communities, and agency nurses go there, and there's also band nurses. So this has been around since 1991 for the nurses. It started in Manitoba because at that time they wanted to check in with the nurses working in the communities and seeing what types of stressors they were actually experiencing. And at that time, they saw that 33% were experiencing PTSD signs and symptoms. So the federal government was like, okay, what can we do? What can we do to support the nurses? And that's where this program was developed. It also, at that time, well, let's fast forward a little bit. It's progressively gotten bigger on the services that we can provide. Back in 91, that was looking at just critical incident stress debriefing. So again, Siobhan, yes, we need it everywhere. We need these debriefings everywhere. So yeah, it was at that time that they were looking at just a critical incident, but fast forward, we're now today looking at, of course, it's not just critical incidents that affect nurses. It's the cumulative stressors, where Rosie was talking about burnout for nurses. There's different type of compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, so many other things that were kind of missed, I would say, and that are more forefront right now. And so now we can provide some more services, and it's excellent. And I will talk a little bit about that. And wellness strategies. I think that we all have spoken on this topic, but I'll just give my little lens on how we approach it and how we've been supporting the nurses. And then I'll just look at a couple other resources that are available to all nurses, not just the ones working in communities. There is definitely some other resources available if there isn't in your EAP employee assistance program through your own benefits available to you. All righty. Here we go. Our OSISM goals. This can, again, I was invited to talk about our service lines, but this is definitely can be for anybody and individually looking at the impacts of workplace stress. This is one of our goals, the primary prevention. What types of stressors are affecting nurses, and what can we do and provide the tools and information and in order to look at their own resiliency against stress. So how can a nurse build their own resiliency? Well, first and foremost is the education and ways on how our own bodies are affected by stress. I know that Siobhan, there was some conversation around the stiff upper lip, right? There was just some discussion during that presentation and in the chat. For me, the one thing that I would say is that healthcare professionals then and now are seeing ourselves that we are not just the healthcare professional, we're human. We're human beings. And what's that mentality of the stiff upper lip, or I've heard the cringe of suck it up, buttercup kind of thing, that type of mentality can come from a place where someone feels that they're the healthcare professional first and not the human being, and that they are not to respond to these types of things. That's, it's just part of the job. Well, no, it's a normal reaction. And I think I'd be harping on to talk about the fight and flight freeze response, right? You can't deny that as a human being. And yeah, so I just, that mentality, I think is since I've been here for the last 14 years. And before that, I was 5 years nursing in First Nations communities full-time. And previous to that, I was born up north, so I'm a northern girl. So it just my life has brought me here, and to be able to support the nurses that I understand those challenges that they're having. But I have seen a shift. I really do believe that stiff upper lip has changed. That we are seeing that. We're human beings. So, and secondly is the early support services interventions. And through our program, we do have the debriefing. We do have cumulative stress coaching, resiliency coaching. And I'll speak to that in a moment. And then obviously is to accelerate the recovery of for the nurse after an event. Briefly talk about the different areas of occupational stress injuries, because I know this has been brought up already. Critical incident stress, how we define it here in OSISM and through the our program, is an event that has occurred at your job that has caused strong reactions which are affecting you at the time or later, where it's affecting your work. For example, I would say that you're having intrusive thoughts, and the next, or maybe 2 days later, you're seeing a patient, but you can't stop thinking about that event that happened. That is affecting your work, right? So we want to be able to support you in any way possible during that critical incident. How we get a hold of nurses, I should just mention after a critical incident, is that the federal government is set up of receiving occurrence reports from communities led by the nurses, and that gets sent to Indigenous Service Canada to let their managers know what has happened. It can be from faulty equipment to something more major, a death, for example. And we're a piggyback system where that occurrence report gets sent to us, and then we make a proactive phone call, because we know nurses are not going to call all the time. So we make that proactive phone call to check in. And I think I heard that in previous presentations too, is like another check-in. How are you doing today? How, that's a hard one. How can I help you, right? So that's after a critical incident. And we know the other ones: vicarious trauma, repetitive, the same event being noticed, and where it can change your world views. Definitely it can affect us because of the work we do. Compassion fatigue, the empathy, right? That heavy heart can be affected. Moral distress, we're hearing it more in literature, but it's definitely not, it has been something hasn't happened. It's just because of our current events that the moral distress is being seen more often. And for what I've been involved in, it's around the short staffing also, because not being able to see everybody, or it's been at the very beginning of the pandemic, who gets the bed, who gets the vaccine. All of those distressors can definitely play on the nurses. Conflict in the workplace, job stress and burnout, normal reaction to ongoing workplace stressors. I'll just mention a stat that has come out in 2020 through Canadian Federation, that 80% of nurses have experienced a critical stress reaction, which is huge, right? In Manitoba, in 2005, they did a study, also Bell Let's Talk Canada. Some of you may be familiar with that. And they looked at what types of critical incident stress reactions were being, what were the causes. And the top ones was short staffing, death of someone you know, and death of a child. So that was the three major ones that were seen as critical stress response in healthcare and in nurses. And this is where I kind of like to look at where we are human and we are unique, right? So we all have these internal and external factors that come into play when we're in an event: our personal history, our family history, how we've coped with things in the past, the nature of the incident, and our social support's big one. And I think that's been spoken to: peer support, social support, right? Where I understand those challenges that nurses are experiencing. Your colleagues understand what you're going through. Having that network of social support is huge. I've seen nurses that have gone through really tough events, but they said they had a good team. They had the support from their team, and that made a world of difference for them. Work environment, the training, the role clarity, management support, of course, a big thing, right? That's the management organizational support during an incident, and access to the diffusing and debriefing. There, you can be triggered for sure in other events, but when we're looking at timely diffusing, our hope for OCISM is definitely to get a hold of them within the first 72 hours after an event, just to check in. Because as we know, the longer it goes, the development of PTSD after a month, right? So there definitely is that timeliness that we want to reach them. I just wanted to throw in this slide because, you know, there was a time that people well or unwell, and we know it's not stagnant. We know it's not stacked. Like we know that there's ebb and flows throughout the day. But we go from this continuum of green to red back to orange, yellow, throughout our day, throughout our life, and just recognizing that and checking in with yourself daily. How am I doing today? Where am I at? What can I do to different types of strategies, our tools and our techniques that we can incorporate into our daily lives. And many have mentioned different types of holistic approaches that we can do for ourselves and our well-being. Just mentioning around workplace stress, there's just different with them. This comes from the mental health continuum that they look at it as mood, attitude, behavior change, and physical changes. So just to throw that slide in, just as an opportunity to see that there is different signs and symptoms when we're moving through this from languishing to distressed or back to thriving or flourishing. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is build this big luggage of different types of resources, tips, techniques for when we need it. And the one thing that I would say is we need to develop it before we're in that situation, right? So we need that emergency plan before we are in the emergency. There's different plans. There's like the daily plan. There's like maybe a booster plan where I just need to take a breath, or there's the emergency plan. So how are we building and coping with these stressors and hardships, right? So knowing that resiliency can be learned. I won't mention a lot on this slide because I think that it has been kind of addressed throughout the different presentations. I'm just putting it in a different wheel where we're looking at the different aspects of our own unique lives and what can we do to incorporate different areas. So professionally, you know, taking our breaks, and personally discovering our goals, looking at our self-awareness, our purpose and our passion, psychological, looking for support groups, looking for counseling, spiritual, that was mentioned prior. I find the joy in daily tasks, right? Discovering our cultural identity. Nature is definitely is seen as a spiritual for some. And again, I think I heard church and religion as another spiritual way. So really looking at who you are and the tools that you're going to put in that toolkit or that luggage bag. Self-compassion, our different types of mindset. You know, we just heard from Victoria talking about safe housing. thank you. Like, that's another thing that is missed when we're looking at our own uniqueness and to develop that social networks, our own emotional intelligence. So just another approach to look. For those in the audience that are working in First Nations communities, I did want to mention the different types of programs that we do offer for autism. And the first and foremost is that proactive phone call. So what we're doing at that time is assessing and diffusing, going over not necessarily the event, but going over how it is feeling for you, how it's how are you dealing with that event. We usually do a follow-up the following day just to see if symptoms have subsided for you. And if they are continuing, that's when we offer the debriefing service, and that is the critical incident stress service. So that is something that we do have throughout nationally. We have mental health professionals that are available to us through our own employee service program, through the federal government, and we would connect the nurse with that MHP. The other types of services is cumulative stress coaching. That is the combination of occupational stress injuries. So we do offer 4 sessions with that that service line. If there is needing ongoing, all of these are, if there is more that is needed, for sure we're going to provide that service and look at how we can support that nurse. There's resiliency coaching. Whenever I look at resiliency and cumulative stress coaching, the difference that I say with those two is that resiliency, we're really looking at setting a goal up, and you're more in a green yellow zone, whereas cumulative stress, there's some reactions happening to, because around occupational stress injuries, and you're more in the yellow orange, and we want to get you back to the green zone. So that's kind of like the differences that I see with those two programs. And then we have me as an assistant coordinator, and I do have other colleagues that we have bilingual nurses, assistant coordinators on staff too, as the peer assistance line, or we do call it well-being check-ins is another way of looking at it. And we can, with that one, we provide support calls to the nurse monthly, as a friendly ear to talk to. And we might at that time see that we might offer one of these other service lines. Yeah, so there's different approaches that we do have for the nurse. Lastly, I talked about the emergency wellness plan. Set that up way before you are an event that it requires, because it's really hard to think of what to do when you are in more of a crisis, and setting it up, what to include, and that's that wheel, or at what others have spoke about in their presentations. That was just wonderful. And okay, so lastly, different types of things for nurses, all on the phone. Wellness Together Canada. There's immediate tech support for the nurses. They're right there. Hope for Wellness for Indigenous peoples across Canada. They also offer language Inuktitut, Cree, Ojibwe as a counseling service, so that's wonderful. Before operational stress, BOSS, that is something that is offered through BC actually, and it is a resiliency coaching program that is self-led. Life Speak is through the government of Canada, and just put in that password Canada, and you're going to have a whole slew of podcasts, meditations, workplace wellness, like just tons of information. But for those that are specific, that may be working for Indigenous Service Canada on the line, there is Center for Integrity of Values and Ethic, or Conflict Resolution. Oh, those big long sentence titles. And then ISC, Indigenous Service Canada, EAP, Employees Assistance Program. That's how you get a hold of me or one of my colleagues, is the EAP. You just ask for OSISM. The 1-800 number is there for you. And if you want to, you can put your phone up to that QR code and and let me know how I did as I ran through it. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that is clear as mud.
Thank you, Carissa, for another excellent presentation, as from all of our panelists. We can now open it up, though, to the floor for any questions to Rosie, Victoria, or Carissa. I would like to bring just the attention to one comment that came earlier on that was posted into the chat during Rosie's presentation from Charlotte Ross. It was just saying, thanking Rosie for contextualizing the prominent individualized or individuated neoliberal emphasis on resiliency, and how your comments were aligned with or parallel to some of the findings that she had in her study that was being published. So I maybe give Charlotte, if you're on, and my apologies for not giving you the opportunity to talk about your publication previously, because I think it's very relevant to the discussion here today. But maybe I'd give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit, without sharing too much about unpublished research, just a little bit about the project and maybe how it's aligned with some of the stuff that came out today. So Charlotte, are you available?
I am. Thank you. I was just thrown out by my computer a little while ago and lost all the chats. So if anyone sent me any notes, I didn't get them. But thanks, Dawn. I certainly didn't expect to talk about my research, but yes, I did notice with Rosie, I did put a note up there of how some of the comments that you made in your presentation contextualize the problem. And I found that and the same with Vicky too, Vicky Smythe. In my research, very briefly, it did, what the nurse elders did believe that student nurses needed to learn was broader than the current discourse that I've read in the literature, which is quite individuated and decontextualized. So sorry, I wasn't prepared to present this, so I'm just trying to think of the important points. But there are three spheres. One was the individual sphere, which is self-care, all those things we know, but some really important ones that we don't talk about, like specifically how to make a line between your work and your home life, and why that is important. The other thing is, the other two spheres was the peer realm, and how important it is to for peer support, and to learn how to be a good peer as well. So that mutuality, and the loss of the important mentors in our system because of the systemic issues, the loss of managers from direct care that we used to have in the Stone Age, who were our mentors. So mentors in our direct work are lost as well, because also the workload isn't supporting mentoring students. And the other thing that Rosie and Vicky alluded to was that organizational realm. and how important advocacy, self-advocacy is. And that came out too. The elders said that that we need to build capacity in the students to not only learn how to manage the emotional labor, but learn how to advocate for psychologically and physically safe working conditions. So lessons learned the hard way. So I put out a call just in British Columbia for participants and a qualitative study, and I got 688 responses. Yes. And I saw your mouth there, Rosie. I'm not turning on my camera because I had no attention to my grooming whatsoever today. So I think like 80 or 90% of them were over the age of 60. And many of them were saying, we have so much to contribute that is lost. So anyway, that's nutshell, but Rosie and Victoria did, you know, that decontextualization that my data showed as well, that the nurse elders had stated. Anyway, so that was sort of a quick nutshell, best as I could do.
No, thank you very much, Charlotte. And maybe I'd ask any of the panelists to respond to anything that Charlotte added here. Victoria?
Oh, I was just thinking that I was thinking about conversation about students, and one of my faculty was saying to me, you know, these students, they're so aggressive about their needs, and they're so this generation, right? And you know, and I was just like, I had to think about it for a moment, right? I have to admit, I was like, well, let's grab hold of that voice then, because if that voice goes into practice, in my day, if we spoke like that, it'd be, here's your hat, what's your hurry? And I was like, no, that's not what we want to do. We want to open the voice. We want people to stand up for things. And yeah, sometimes it's not reasonable, but we have to have the conversation with our students, and they're so smart, man. They run circles around me. And I was like, let's celebrate that voice and encourage students to stand up in our environment here in the educational sphere and make it safe for them to do it outside, because believe me, that's not a safe environment necessarily. Students talk about power relations, and it's big in the environment. So, you know, you're a student and you're now being precepted, so you immediately don't have as much power as, you know, the other people, right? And so it's also about just helping in a debrief conversation, helping students deal with those things and moving forward. So that's what I would say to it, to what the elders said about it, because voice to me is just hugely important. It comes up every week, by the way, that somewhere they needed their voice and they had trouble using it. They also have to be bystanders to bad conversation, you know, stinking thinking. And they have to, they're expected to be transformative. So we talk about stinking thinking and how they can help to create a better conversation, a different conversation. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and the students are marvelous. I marvel at them all the time. So.
Thanks, Victoria. And Dionne had her hand up. So Dionne.
It's similar to what was being said, but this is towards Rosie's presentation. And at one point, Rosie, you said about the nursing shortage, and it's like a global nursing shortage. I did my master's looking at IENs and looking at poaching from other countries. And when I looked at the data, there's over 500,000 registered nurses in North America. However, because they're not feeling valued or appreciated or not being treated well, they're selling cars, they're selling houses, they're stay-at-home moms, they go off, some are driving truck because they'd rather do that. So when Victoria's talking about a message and the discourse, leaving the profession is sending a message saying, I'm done, I'm out of here, and I will go be a, I don't know, used car salesperson. And so there are plenty of registered nurses. If you look at the amount graduating from schools and getting registration, but in 1 to 2 years, because of ill treatment or poor leadership and just a horrible toxic work environment, they're not staying. And my own daughter, love her to death, a full-time job she had at St. Mike's, and they refused, wouldn't even consider giving her a time off that she needed. Oh, Mom, I just quit. I go, what? You did what? We would never, ever think of doing that. She got another job right away, but would never, ever think of just quitting. Well, nope, they refused to even consider it. How can they not even consider? She's out. And it was, whoa, never. So there are many, 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 many nurses out there. We need to start treating them better, or they're not going to stay. And I'm worried because I'm getting old and I need someone to look after me. So we have to start treating everyone better.
And there's some support for your comments, Dionne, in the chat, that this generation has a very different take on employment and voicing their needs. So this is very relevant. There was also a comment, and Cindy, to not put you on the spot, but there was a question to Rosie about presenteeism in her presentation, and just the opportunity to maybe talk a little bit about presenteeism and its impact into our greater conversation here today. So maybe, Rosie, I'd give you the chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue that we're aware of within sort of our context is kind of, I suppose, really what I put in the chat. It's the problem of people feeling guilty because we have these staff shortages, so the areas are really short. Staff are really, some of them are really, really stressed. They're overburdened, but we also have people turning up still when they're really quite ill and or not taking time to recover when when they have been ill, so they're not coming back at full capacity for working, and the problem that creates, I guess, is the psychological issues for people about not feeling able to take that time off. It rescues organizations because organizations are being allowed to continue as is because actually the individuals are taking that strain. And instead of organizations actually dealing with, again, something that is an indicator of a problem within an organization. And I don't mean just sort of a hospital, but maybe sometimes it is more localized than others, but I'm really talking a systemic issue that we have here. So, and I think, I think a number of the issues that we have with organizations as systemic issues, I see them also quite gendered. So they're about women, they're about emotions, they're about actually being really supportive of your colleagues and the connections, the social connections that you make, and not letting people down. And I'm not saying men don't do that, but I think actually the organizations, they get away with it partly because actually it's, and I'm making a huge generalization here, but it's slightly a gendered thing, and it is, I think women are more prone to all of these ways of keeping things going at all cost, particularly because patients at the end, they know will suffer. And so it's about their colleagues, but then it's about the patients, and it leads to a really unhealthy cycle. So there you go. I didn't know I had so much to say about it, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Thanks, Rosie. And there was a comment from Melissa in the chat as well. She works on an ACT or ACT team in Kelowna, and the guilt also applies to letting clients down. So it's not just, the personal guilt, or it goes beyond that. It's a high need clientele served by this team, and it has impacts on the clients if there's nobody there. So I think there's a big conversation here that this is all a part of. I could turn it over to just if there's hands up for anybody that would like to ask any of our panelists any questions. Going to the chat. So how can we push for change in the system so it listens to us? Or and maybe I'd give this one to Carissa. How do you get the system to listen? Or what kind of, is it the message? Is it the voice? Any ideas to address that question?
Oh, wow. That's a difficult one, isn't it? It's the voice. I like how Victoria put it, like an open voice. That's that the generational differences that has occurred now from even when I was going to school. I think that there is more of a voice from students and from leaders that are coming out that they can look at change. I think it's going to their organization and speaking to them about situations where I would feel that in the past you would just go along, right? And I'm glad that there's that shift and change, and the shift in seeing that mental health is mental health. Like, it is just as important as physical health. And I think that's what I see. That's why in my organized with autism, there's value in mental health now. And it's going to the powers of be, or however, within your organization, and advocating for you as a nurse and your well-being in order to keep those nurses where mentioned that they're leaving the field because of not feeling valued, those ones. So I don't know, it's a hard but it's going to the leadership and advocating.
And I see Joe Muxlow with your hand up. I'll turn it over to you, Joe.
So thank you. So my comment is with regards to the change piece. I think so often as nurses, we have not held organizations and leadership in the organization accountable. We have been able to carry the burden at our own expense. And I think mainly because there's always been this fear of being punished if you speak, and even more so if you're a woman of color or a Black woman. But I think coming from a mental wellness, mental well-being perspective, I think it's about time that we look at how do we hold system accountable for the structural inequities that happens at the back of mental health nurses. Some time ago, we had those 13 psychological workplace factors, which talked about recognizing and valuing and civility. And I think one of the big things I think each one of us as mental health nurses, even though I'm retired, is about how do we challenge the system with regards to being so uncivil to nurses who are the backbone of the system. And so I think with the young ones who have the voice, which is kudos to them, it's about how do we build that we don't lose a voice? Because for many nurses within the system, why the change hasn't occurred is because we have lost a voice because we were fearful of what would happen. And so we talk about decolonizing the system, but how do we look at it at reclaiming who we are, and how do we have people in leadership role who will start valuing the contribution that nurses bring to the table and recognize that? Because without that, creating that space where you can thrive and strive, the system continues. And I think we as mental health nurses, because especially the way we've been we look at things, has created that system whereby there is no accountability because of fear of us being, retaliation or punish or those sort of things. So this is 2024. And I think for all mental well-being, we need to, how do we advocate not only for ourselves, but how do we advocate to make sure we reclaim our voice within the system to break down those structural barriers and those inequities that continue today in the name of progress. That's just a comment that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And Stephanie, I saw your hand up. I can give you the floor, and then I can go to Rosie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm a living proof of how an organization, an environment, when it's unhealthy, how it can impact a person. I began my career as a nurse 20 years ago, and I knew I wanted to be a mental health nurse. So I started right from the beginning there. But my personal life was also going into a torment. I lost my sister from cancer in that first year that she was in. Being a nurse, you want to be there for your family at that time. And, you know, one person mentioned when you are a nurse in the family, a lot of people expect a lot from you. So I had no support from my place of work. Being a mental health nurse, working in mental health, going through my personal journey of my mental health struggle, they just kept waiting my sick time, just there. Okay, you're doing good, but you know, like there's the national average of attendance. I think micromanagement, they need to step back from that. And when I say I'm living proof, when I switch now I'm working, I'm part of the mental wellness team for First Nations communities. So I work under Indigenous Service Canada. And the support, I have 3 times the task load of what I had in my previous job. We all know that the trauma, the complexity of cases is different, but I feel supported and I am better at what I do. We have recognition, we have reward. Our bosses organizes specifically a ceremony to recognize us each year. That makes such a big difference, and it's small things. It doesn't have to be huge. You know, we talk about self-care today. When we did our CISM training for the First Nations communities, we invited the public as well to join us because we feel that when we deal with crisis, we need a community, not just the professional. So we revamped and renamed the CISM, and we call it Take It to the Fire, because we're using the culture and the medicines and the ceremonies as well. It's so beautiful to see the things like that, and it's something probably I'd like to see in worldwide, like to include the culture part of it, because it's been so healing for a lot of people.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie. Very relevant to the conversation. Rosie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. That was really lovely to hear, actually, Stephanie, particularly the reflections on the culture and how supportive that is. I suppose I was thinking, you know, in terms of shifting systems kind of on a sort of a macro scale, thinking about actually we need to, but I think there's 2 things. I think we need to have a united sort of voice. We need to stand together. I'm a member of a union. I think that's really important that actually we have some kind of united voice. And interestingly, when Lorna Butler from your university, Dionne, New Brunswick, came across, and I met with her recently, we were talking about that kind of how do we start sort of shifts in the discourse around about nursing. It was actually around about something else to do with nursing, but on an international level, because there are so many things that are actually the same and similar issues, and yet, you know, so you could have sort of solidarity that we need, I think, on a national level as a group of mental health nurses. And I think engaging with chief nursing officers in the government. There are people in government, well, there's people in our Scottish government and the English government, I'm assuming somewhere in the Canadian governments or in the sort of the more local administrations, there are as well, who would be people who we need to get on side and be able to influence. And I think that kind of political engagement can only happen if we're actually doing it as a group of people as opposed to as individual people. And I think, you know, students I think they're much more politically aware. I think the climate crisis means that actually students are thinking about how do we change things? How do we push in? And a lot of the how do we change things, they, you know, they're using their voice, they're thinking creatively and innovatively as well. And so I think, you know, harnessing them and people who have the longer sort of experience of the mental health service and bringing that together, I think would be really, really strong. So yeah, so I guess I would advocate for some sort of collectivism, collective action, and harnessing the political engagement of our students and our younger generations coming in, because actually it's terrifying for them. They come in as newly graduated nurses. We're disappearing because older nurses are retiring, and many of the wards are being, you know, inpatient units are being staffed by very, very new nurses, and they talk about feeling quite unsafe in that context. So, you know, there is a need for us to do something and to change these things so that then we don't lose so many nurses, and we might even attract some back.
Thanks for that, Rosie. And I see Jean has her hand up as well. So Jean.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to just say that I think it's really, really important that we push, and get the students, you know, a lot of the students are willing to push right now. And they're, you know, they're pushing back and saying, why are we not doing this or that? What we need to be getting the students to push and to think about if they're going to go into clinical practice, they need to push. I mean, they're going to be doing work and whatever, and maybe it's the first time or whatever it is, or a new spot, but we need to be pushing and getting them thinking to work together. How could you do something? What do you think needs to happen? And getting all bodies to work together, because we need to be going, you know, at all levels. And the students are feeling that as their education progresses, that they're learning some skills and they're actually engaged in some advocacy work. That's what is really important, because once they graduate, then, you know, what we're saying, you keep going, keep doing it, keep pushing for whatever is needed. To me, and when we're hearing about the presentations today, didn't matter where anybody was working. Different countries and all over Canada, we're all experiencing the same thing. And it's really, really important that we push, we keep pushing and getting the students to push, and we not accept, you know, whatever's going on. And, you know, back to, you know, power. And, you know, I think it's the power of nursing, and we're talking about, you know, gender as well, but definitely the power of nursing, because very often nursing is just totally dismissed. Oh yeah, you can just do all of that stuff. You know, it's so important that the students, as they're developing, they're pushing back, and we are supporting them in pushing back. I just think it's so important that we just don't let it go. Thanks.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much, Jean, for your comments as well. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I can give the floor to at least maybe one more question to any of our panelists, or if there's any comments that anyone would like to add. Now is your opportunity. And I have also been monitoring the chat. There seems to be some real again great discussions kind of happening while the discussion's happening. So that is excellent to see just the level of engagement. Perhaps this is then a natural kind of ending point then for the panel discussion. I'd like to thank our panelists, Dr. Rosie Stenhouse, Dr. Victoria Smythe. I've been probably pronouncing it wrong all day, so my apologies. And Carissa McEachran. Excellent discussion, excellent participation, and overall an excellent education day. So that brings us then to the end of our program. Thanks to everybody for attending the Education Day. And now we can actually move into maybe some fun things to conclude. We can move to our door prize draw for one free admission to our national Federation conference being held this November in Ottawa. So random generator, everyone's name was put into the bin, and I'd like to congratulate our winner. And my apologies for pronouncing the name. Colombe Thibodeau. Are you online? So everyone, congratulations, Colombe, for winning. We'll be in contact with all of the information about granting you access to our national conference in November. So congratulations. This is also then the time to remind you that a certificate of participation is going to be sent out in the next couple of days to everyone, along with a brief evaluation survey to be sent out. In addition, an edited recording of this of all of the individual sessions are going to be made available to membership through our CFMHN website in the near future. And just thanks to everybody in attendance for making the education today so amazing. That brings our International Day for Mental Health Nurses celebration to a close. Thank you to everyone for attending. Please enjoy the rest of your day.